Recording in progress. We on?
Okay,
Good.
Mayor, we can start.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome Captain Barstow for the invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for all that you entrust to us as stewards of this city. We are truly blessed as a community and strive to glorify you in all that we do. Lord, we ask for your presence tonight and that you provide clarity and guide us in all the decisions that lay before us tonight. We ask that you guide our leaders, staff, and residents as they weigh the questions before them tonight, and that we all work together towards the best possible solutions. We also ask that you watch over our family, friends, and loved ones, and that you pour your continued blessings over all of us when our time tonight is concluded. It's in your most blessed name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I would like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, August 1st, 2022 to order. The city strongly recommends that you review tonight's agenda carefully, and if you wish to speak on any item on the agenda, then please bring your comment cards to the clerk as soon as possible. While the Milton rules allow a speaker to turn in their comment card up until the clerk calls the agenda item, once the agenda item is called, no more comment cards can be accepted. Will the city clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the August 1st, 2022 regular meeting. I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Those attending the meeting who would like to make a public comment, you are required to complete a yellow public comment card prior to speaking on the item. The yellow comment cards can be found at the door on the table right to the door when you walk in. Those attending the meeting who would like to make a public comment, you will be required to submit your item and before speaking on it, which can be found on the table just as you walk in the chambers. Thank you. Please note, your comment card must be presented to the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Any comments received after the item has been called will not be accepted. All speakers, please identify yourself, the name, address, and an organization before beginning your comment. If you are representing an organization, an affidavit is required stating you have the authority to speak on behalf of that organization. Please review tonight's agenda, and if you would like to make a comment, please bring your comment card to me now. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited. Please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outburst, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll this evening, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Peyton Jamison.
Here.
Councilmember Andrea Veerhoff.
Here.
Councilmember Paul Moore.
Here.
Councilmember Juliette Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Jan Jacobus.
Here.
And Councilmember Rick Morg.
Here.
And for the record, Councilmember Carol Kirkley is absent. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the city clerk please stay on the next item?
Mayor, that next item is approval of the meeting agenda. It's agenda item number 22230. Mayor?
Thank you. Council, I would like to make one amendment to the agenda. If we can move unfinished business, agenda item number 22-152 to immediately follow after the reading of the consent agenda. I'll open it for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as you have requested. Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Moore and a second from Councilmember Morg to approve the meeting agenda as amended. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. Will the city clerk please, next is general public comment. Do we have any general public comment?
We do, Mayor.
Okay. The next item is general public comment. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor and the city council and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Please remember, this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You will have 5 minutes for remarks. The city encourages you to review the agenda, and if you wish to speak, to bring your comment cards to the city clerk right now. If the city clerk will please call the first.
Mayor, I'd
comment.
like to invite Roland Morva to the podium, please. Roland Morva.
My name is Rohan Mova. I live at 525 Cogdell Trail, Milton, Georgia. I just wanted to talk about remembering John Milton here in Milton, Georgia. You know, this is the greatest, strongest, best community that there is with the greatest leadership. And there's so much you guys are doing to propel Milton forward. But while you're doing that, and I think it's amazing, the best. And I think while you're doing that, I think it would be great to remember John Milton in some way, as Milton's named after John Milton, as he was a Revolutionary War hero, a big part in Georgia's founding, the first Secretary of State, and the signer to Georgia's ratification of the U.S. Constitution. And I think it would be so cool if we were able to remember him in some way by naming a park after him or some sort of statue. I mean, I'm not sure about the funding for that, fundraising or whatever, but I think it would be so cool to remember John Milton in some way as the Revolutionary War hero that he was to Georgia and the namesake that he is to Milton. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes general public comment, Mayor.
So we will close the public comment period and we will move on to consent agenda. Will the city clerk please sound the items?
First item is approval of the July 25th, 2022 special called council meeting. It's agenda item number 22231. Item B is approval of a products agreement and addendum between the City of Milton and Nearmap US Inc. to provide 3D elevation data for GIS mapping purposes. Agenda item number 22232. And item C is approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police for a promotional assessment center. It's agenda item number 22233. Mayor?
Thank you. I'd like to open it for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I make motion that we approve the consent agenda as read. Second?
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Morgan, a second from Councilmember Jacobus to approve the consent agenda as read. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. So we will move on to the unfinished business item, agenda number 22-152. Will the city clerk sound the item?
Mayor, that item is consideration of an agreement between the City of Milton and White Columns Community Association, Inc. for installation of 4 radar feedback signs. It was deferred for 90 days at the May 2nd, 2022 regular council meeting, and it's agenda item number 22152. Mayor?
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Ms. Leaders, I'd like to turn it over to Councilmember Moore for a couple of remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you would please accept my request this evening, out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to choose to excuse myself and not participate in this agenda item this evening.
Okay.
And as such, I will step away.
All right, thank you. I will turn it over to Ms. Leaders.
Okay, I've got a few slides I'm going to go through for this consideration of agreement related to radar feedback signs. Since the last time this was before you, these were the things that staff was going to work on collecting to review during this period. So we were going to do an updated speed study to install stop signs that were warranted for safety reasons, to collect information from the police department on number of tickets written, citations, what speeds, and then the item related to the HOA's efforts to conduct a community survey. First of all, wanted to highlight a few data points that we'll be discussing in the next slides related to the speed and the citations. So this map shows a couple different things. First of all are the radar signs that are currently installed. There's 4 of those, and this shows the direction that those signs face, the side of the road they're on, and then the arrow represents the direction vehicles are traveling that will see those signs. The red circles are the new all-way stop intersections. That's at Trayburn Manor View and White Columns Drive, and then Trayburn Manor View and Hallbrook Court. So those were newly installed multi-way stops. And then the red rectangles represent 2 locations where we've conducted speed and volume counts along those 2 sections of roadway. So related to speed study, we have 6 locations that we've counted over the past. And 2 of those locations we updated as part of this effort to look at speeds again. And those are represented by the numbers 4 and 5 as shown on this map. Again, there's 6 locations that we have conducted counts on from 2016 to the present. So related to those updated counts, from May 10th to the 12th, the radar signs that were installed were turned off as those counts took place. And then from July 12th to 14th, that's the second round of counts we did, the stop signs had been installed and were operational, and the radar signs were on. So this shows some of the data related to those 2 counts. So count location A is the White Columns Drive and B is Trayburn Manor View. And then the radar signs are shown on this map as well. So a couple things we looked at from a data standpoint in each direction were the 85th percentile speed. That is a tool we use in traffic engineering that is the speed at which only 15% of the cars are going faster than that speed. So that's used in evaluating speed limits and really coming up with kind of that upper limit of speeds along a roadway. So the top 3 lines show those locations, what those speeds were from February of 2019, the May of 2022, and the July of 2022 numbers. So White Columns Drive heading eastbound, so that would be heading towards Freemanville. The 85th speed dropped from 37 to 34, both in May and July. Westbound, that's going to be heading towards the country club, and that speed increased slightly in May and then decreased in July. In Trayburn Manor, decreased in May and then decreased again in July. Another number we look at related to our traffic calming program is the percent of cars that are going over the posted speed limit. And that is one of our thresholds to qualify for city funds for traffic calming, is that at least half of the cars would need to be traveling over the speed limit. So you can see again, the 3 lines here represent those count data for the 3 locations from 2019, May of 22, and July of 22. And the last number we want to look at is the average daily traffic. So that takes the amount of cars collected over the entire count period, and it creates an average per day in each direction. In May, we did see a spike on White Columns Drive. Could have been related to an activity at the golf course or country club. So that number was higher than what we saw in 19, but relatively similar numbers between February 19 and July of 22 related to volumes on all 3. I mentioned the all-way stop signs were operational as of July 5th of 2022. And the radar signs, the HOA has been collecting data from those signs. Looking at our police data, and this is particularly just for the White Columns Golf section. And we looked at data collected from April 1st of 2021 through July 27th of this year. There's been 78 traffic stops, issued 61 electronic citations, and 4 of those were for speeding. 2 cars were going 37 or ticketed at 37 and 2 at 42. There were 28 warnings reported during that time, and 1 of those was for speeding at 41 miles an hour. Our record system doesn't include, we're not able to capture with this report any handwritten citations or warnings. And just a note that some drivers may have received more than 1 citation per stop. This is a repeat of the slides that were part of the last presentation about what's included in this agreement that's being presented tonight. First of all, we have the right of entry, and the portion that's part of the agreement is separate than what a right-of-way encroachment permit does. A right-of-way encroachment permit covers the work in the right-of-way, the sign installation, and restoring any city property in the right-of-way as part of that work. And I did want to note that while the right-of-way permit for these signs was issued near the completion of the installation, Public Works staff and the HOA had been coordinating over the past 6 months. And Public Works staff did mark and approve the sign locations before installation began. The right of entry that's part of the agreement covers the ability for the HOA to enter into the right of way at any point in time to maintain and access those signs. There's the other components of the agreement. Again, I mentioned the right of entry for future maintenance. It spells out different items related to the private improvements, which are considered, the radar signs are considered a private improvement. The public improvements, anything in the right of way that could be impacted by the signs, maintenance obligation, the duration of the agreement, and then applicable laws. And the last point of the agreement is the city contribution and data sharing. So based on the base bid for a radar sign, like we have throughout the city, we determine that cost through competitive bid. And that's what we based our, what we consider the base model of a radar sign. And the ones that were installed were enhancements to that base model. So the city would only propose to contribute half of the base, and that's according to our traffic calming policy and ordinance. So based on those numbers, the city cost for the 4 signs at a 50% of that, again, the base cost is $6,853. And lastly, included in the agreement is data sharing, that any of the data collected by that signs could be made available to the city as requested. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Any questions to Sarah before we have public comment? Okay. Amy, if you'll please call the first public comment.
Mayor, I would first like to introduce into the record public comments that were received via email. And I would like to note for the record that I am reading these in the order in which they were received. And then I'll move on to the yellow public comment cards for inviting the speakers to the podium. The first comment is from Dinah Snow at 635 Scarlet Oak Trail. She is opposed to this item. Edgar Snow at 635 Scarlet Oak Trail, opposed. Cliff Butler at 15430 White Columns Drive is opposed. Courtney Hensley at 15340 White Columns Drive is opposed. I will read her comment. I strongly oppose the speed signs, cost sharing, and additional forms of traffic calming in White Columns. In 2019, the city told the past HOA board that even though a mandatory HOA existed, they still need to receive 67% approval. Why has this changed? And knowing that, how did a city employee allow the current board to railroad them into hastily installing the current speed signs without city approval and the majority of the Gulf residents? During the May 2nd City Council meeting, it was stated that the mayor, along with the other council persons, had no idea that the cost-sharing agenda item that evening was for signs that had already been installed. It seems clear that the proper process was not followed. Stop signs were supposed to be installed before the speed study. Most likely that would have been enough, along with periodic police presence, which has already been shown to be very effective. Instead, speed signs without proper permits were installed before the stop signs, and now the board is talking about adding yet more speed tables. So because of a mismanaged process, Gulf residents are now paying the price of having speed signs up that were never properly approved by the city or the residents. The current HOA has never honestly engaged residents and has never fairly asked our opinions. They continue to publish and report results, yet sadly they are skewed, slanted, and misrepresent a large majority. We who live in the Gulf section are now paying for an error in proper protocol. And the only fair thing to do is to make it right by taking down the signs and not to allow any further actions to be taken in the Gulf section without proper engagement, discussion, and honest, fair result reporting. Christine Heel at 15280 White Columns Drive is opposed. Joseph Hill at 15280 White Columns Drive is opposed. Sharon Butler, 15430 White Columns Drive, opposed. Kevin Hensley, 15340 White Columns Drive. In any type of official office, it takes incredible diplomacy to juggle and meet the short and long-term demands of all parties involved. Unfortunately, our current board has not done this. Number one, diplomacy takes courage to do the right thing in order to be trusted, and trust is the foundation for everything. Number two, diplomats listen more than they talk. Just because you're in a position of power doesn't mean you know everything. Every successful leader gathers input from and listens to every person involved. Number three, diplomats compromise. This is when everyone gives up a little but agrees to the decision for the greater good of our community, a shared solution. The current HOA board has not in any form given the golf residents of White Columns a voice in any of the recent traffic calming measures. This includes the planned speed tables, which need to be stopped before they happen. In summary, our HOA board or so-called governing power created, enacted, or carried out diplomacy in any way, or have they forced the other views of the overall community? Dana Williams Dudley. I live in the Gulf at 590 Glen Hampton Drive. She is opposed. I live in Gulf section of White Columns, and I'm a former HOA president. This has always been a mandatory HOA. Between 2016 and 2019, the former board of directors attempted to obtain cost sharing for speed tables. However, we were told that we needed to obtain 67% approval from impacted residents. We felt that we would not be able to obtain that level of approval, and as a result, discontinued the project. At the May 2nd meeting, the City Council encouraged the board to survey residents. The survey, which was titled, "Thank You for Keeping Our Families Safe," contained the following leading questions. Yes, I support the new radar-controlled speed signs to help keep families safe in White Columns. No, I do not support the new radar-controlled speed signs. The yes response was in bold print and suggested that the vote yes means that you are in favor of keeping families safe. But if you vote no, you are not in favor of safety. This survey was conducted in bad faith, left residents with a moral dilemma if they choose to vote no. I don't believe that it represents the type of survey that City Council had in mind when you asked the board to survey the residents. As recently as the February 2022 Board of Directors meeting, the board reported that the ad hoc speeding committee would be meeting to discuss all available speed remediation initiatives with Gulf residents at large. No such discussions have occurred to date. The board has not been forthcoming with the residents or with the City of Milton. The survey is an example of their behavior. Their actions don't represent the community. Please vote no. Laura Wallace, 960 Trayburn Run. Opposed. The HOA did not provide details on sign placement or engage community in meaningful discussion regarding specifics prior to install, and still has not provided any opportunity for community discussion on these signs. The survey recently conducted by the board at City Council's request did not allow any opportunity to provide any feedback beyond yes or no, and its wording showed survey bias. I believe City Council's expectations for the survey were not met by the board. For this reason, I do not expect the council to fund these signs. Richard Meyer at 300 White Columns Drive, opposed. Joe Scripture at 15360 White Columns Drive, opposed. Christine Hill at 15280 White Columns Drive, opposed. An unbiased survey should have been sent to residents before the signs were installed to gather residents' opinions. The board was elected to listen to and represent the people, not do as they please. Out of the 50-plus tickets issued in White Columns Golf last year, only 5 were for speeding. The speed studies conducted over the years show the average speed in White Columns has not increased. It is also my understanding that the location of 2 of the signs do not meet the minimum number of daily traffic counts to qualify for speed calming measures, probably because the location of the signs do not match the locations listed on the permit. Kelly Goldschneider at 585 Glen Hampton Drive, opposed. Stacy Harp at 410 Highlands Manor Court, opposed. Pam Scripture at 15360 White Columns Drive, opposed. Mary Lavelle at 15400 White Columns Drive, Opposed. I would like the city council to note that I am opposed. I am so disappointed and disheartened by the personal agendas and missteps made by not only the HOA, but too by the city. No one wants lives lost and am offended by such an inference. I would like to see the radar-controlled speed signs removed and the proposed installation of speed tables halted. Ed Thorne, 525 Trayburn View, opposed. Don Crane, 305 White Columns Court, opposed. Laura Warren at 15300 White Columns Drive, opposed. Timothy Kemper at 15315 White Columns Drive, I'm opposed in the position of the cost-sharing agreement. Derek Giddings, 170 White Columns Drive, it's opposed. Brad Jones, 15330 White Columns Drive, opposed. The actions by the HOA need to be voted and agreed upon by the residents, especially those affected by their actions directly and not the ones living in a separate area. The board is making decisions on behalf of people without allowing for the voice of everyone involved to be heard. Shelley Costello, 510 Trayburn View. I oppose the large speed signs in our once tranquil White Columns neighborhood. The signs are way too large for a well-established neighborhood like ours, and the residents had no input. I encourage the city to ask the White Columns board to remove the signs as they never had approval to install them in the first place. Our neighborhood was not even informed that this was occurring until after the signs went up. The majority of the board doesn't even live in the golf section of White Columns. Instead, they live in the gated side and aren't as affected as those of us in the golf section. A month or so later, additional stop signs were installed, which seem totally redundant, but are actually tasteful and are being obeyed as far as I can see. Mayor, that concludes the email public comment portion.
Okay. If you will please call the first speaker.
That first speaker, Mayor, and is just voicing the approval of the city financial support is Steve Buenthal. Does not wish to speak.
Okay.
The next person I'd like to invite to the podium is Joseph Gaines. Oh, that's the name on here. So it's, okay, my apologies. Joseph Gaines is in opposition. And Karen Kemper, I invite you to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Karen Kemper, and I live at 15315 White Columns Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you. I do not support the cost-sharing agreement nor the radar speed signs. Has the cost-sharing agreement been corrected to show the updated permit map? The one attached to the agenda contains incorrect information, and policies, procedures, and most importantly, ordinances were not followed. These 4 signs do not appear to follow Ordinance 48-235E. The city follows federal guidelines, and these signs seem to miss key elements by being multicolored and missing static speed limit signs. To call these signs decorative would imply that they do not qualify under this ordinance. The most glaring guideline that was ignored has to do with the motorist's reasonable expectation of where to look for a traffic sign. The sign flashes changing speed and messaging and is placed on the left-hand side of the street, past oncoming traffic and pedestrians, which diverts the driver's attention from the road for a significant amount of time. Where else have you seen such a sign? This is a safety liability on a city street with the potential to create exactly the problem we all wish to avoid. The signs were installed without a permit, which is required under 48-283. The permit was not applied for until April 28th and then approved April 29th. The signs, however, were completely installed by April 26th, with the footings installed on March 17th. The original application was primarily to install stop signs, so why were 4 radar signs installed first? The HOA purchased 4 radar speed signs before the city determined where the stop signs would be placed, resulting in an extra radar speed sign. According to Mr. Moats, whom I spoke to on March 18th, no other locations were feasible per the city standards. An extra sign, according to Roddy Moats, that the city agreed to put somewhere just because the HOA had already purchased it. It was not warranted. The location on the permits map does not follow ordinances 48-235A4 and 237, which state that in order to qualify for traffic calming devices, a residential street must first qualify with an average daily traffic count of at least 400. Prior traffic studies do not meet this requirement. If a street doesn't meet this threshold, consideration of average speeds under 236A is moot. When I mentioned to Roddy Moats that only 28 or so homes were affected by the extra sign, he commented that he'd wished he'd known that earlier. This sign should never have been installed. The same is true for the sign on Trayburn Manor View. As we've seen tonight on the data collection sign slide, Trayburn Manor View's traffic counts are consistently below 400. Why are we not adhering to the traffic count threshold? These two signs do not qualify under the ordinances. Both signs absolutely must be permanently removed. Traffic studies have not been conducted in the back of White Columns Drive since 2016, presumably because of the insufficient traffic counts. The HOA did not gain community support before these signs were installed. The recent survey is biased to obtain an affirmative vote. Tony Palazzo stated in May that the HOA has a responsibility to the community. Why then was the new survey so biased? Why did these radar speed signs precede the stop signs? Why were radar speed signs installed without following the ordinance, without a permit when installed, in the wrong direction, without community support? Why is a sign in a completely unqualified location creating a safety liability on a city street? Two are most definitely non-compliant. The city and the HOA literally sped their way through the process, failing the community.
1 minute.
I ask tonight for the radar speed signs, all of them, to be removed. The cost-sharing agreement should be rejected. The city must follow correct procedures and ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Please call the next speaker.
I'd like to next invite Suzanne Gaines to the podium, please.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Gaines, and I live at 540 Trayburn View. My name is Suzanne Gaines, and my husband Joe and I have lived at 540 Trayburn View in the White Columns Golf section for 9 years. We are opposed to the current traffic calming devices being installed in our neighborhood for many reasons. There has been no community consensus on solutions. The internet-based survey and the recent biased mailer that was sent out by the HOA are not accurate representations of the entire golf community. I am house number 98 on the marked survey that every golf resident got. And as you can see, it's bold where you should go yes, and it's no if you don't want it, and it's in a lighter font. And every ballot back was marked by a house number, so I'm now 98. The city has not followed their own published processes, which include approving locations of speed radar signs in areas that are below the average daily traffic count threshold of 400 and do not qualify for traffic calming measures, approving permits for the speed radar signs after they were installed, and allowing speed radar signs to be installed in locations that are different than what was shown on maps referred to by the city for approved locations. We request that the city direct the removal of these speed radar signs and continue with the process of education, police enforcement, and conduct a speed study after school is back in session to see how the neighborhood or how the installation of stop signs helps to reduce speed in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd like to next invite Dave Lavelle to the podium, please. Did I get that right? I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Dave Lavelle. I live with my wife, Mary, at 15400 White Columns Drive. We've lived at this address since 2010. Mr. Mayor and esteemed city council members, thank you for taking the time to listen to our views on this topic. First, I want to say we value the lives of all our neighbors and visitors to our community. We don't want to see anyone lose their life. From my understanding, 0 lives have been lost in the traffic accidents, and 0 pedestrian-involved accidents have occurred in the past 22 years since the Gulf neighborhood was built. You can't improve upon 0 lives lost, no matter how many emails and flyers the HOA board sends framing themselves as our protectors. It just feels like this entire speed calming plan has been completely backwards. Why would the HOA buy the radar speed signs without gauging resident opinion before spending our association funds? Why would they then send an email survey to a targeted small group of residents several months later, but before installing the signs to gauge support? I assume they thought they would get the support of the radar signs, but the signs came in a distant third to the top 2 recommendations from the targeted group of neighbors. First place was continuing education. Second place was an increased police presence. Knowing that they had already received the signs, they pushed forward and installed them, I believe even before the permit was issued. Why wouldn't stop signs have been the first measure? That would have been prudent, since it would have been the least costly. Then gauge the impact of the stop signs to see if they're effective. But this HOA board has an agenda. Mr. Moore, our neighbor and city councilman, suggested the vote for cost sharing be deferred so that more info, including a speed study, analyzing police records for tickets issued, and a homeowner survey could be completed. Almost immediately, Mr. Palazzo filed an ethics complaint against Mr. Moore. He clearly wanted to silence his vote, when in my opinion, Mr. Moore was just doing his job, listening to his constituents and neighbors who spoke up. And for the record, that survey that was sent to homeowners was a complete sham. It's totally biased. It was not anonymous. It read like a bad political campaign mail piece or infomercial. Numbers on the response card correlated to the number on the other portion of the card, so the board would know exactly who voted which way. The survey offered 2 choices. The first in bolded black font read, "Yes, I support the radar speed signs to help keep our families safe." The second simply said, "I do not support the radar speed signs." Clearly, it was presented that way for a reason. Now, why would they send out a survey that was so one-sided, I ask? I have to think they weren't confident they would get the support of the neighborhood if they sent an unbiased survey. Again, for 22 years, we've had no pedestrian-involved accidents of any type. Why then do we need all of the possible speed calming measures to be thrown into our neighborhood at once? In summary, there have been several missteps on both the city and the HOA board's parts, including timing of installation and permits, number of signs installed and location, one of which is clearly a hazard since it's on the wrong side of the road, signs that do not comply with the manual on uniform traffic control devices as required by the state of Georgia, 2 signs that are in locations that don't even meet requirements for traffic calming initiatives due to low daily volume counts from the speed studies. The signs on Trayburn Manor View and on White Columns Drive past the club never should have been installed. We feel the best thing to do in this case is step things back by removing all of the signs and analyze the effectiveness of the stop signs before any other measures are taken. Please do not approve the installation of speed tables at a cost of $20,000 to $30,000. We don't think this is good use of association funds. Mr. Mayor, you voted against a deferral in May. I believe you have a relationship with Mr. Palazzo.
1 minute.
Is it not true that your son plays on a youth football team coached by Mr. Palazzo? If so, shouldn't you have recused yourself from the vote and disclosed this information at the May City Council meeting? Lastly, I urge the City Council not to allow the speed tables to be installed, or at least defer until 2023 when a much more reasonable board is in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Please call the next speaker.
Mayor, I'd like to call Kyle Rose to the podium, please.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Kyle Rose here on behalf of my wife, Kyle and Melissa. We live at 15325 Trayburn Manor View. We are actually one of the people that have the radar signs in our yard. So the first sign going down Trayburn, the B radar sign is in our yard. We also have 3 young children, 7, 5, and 2, who are regularly playing out in our yard, riding their bikes, riding their scooters, playing basketball and soccer. We moved into the neighborhood roughly a year ago, August of last year. Before that time, there were no speed measures in place. There was constant speeding, not only going past our house, there's a large hill coming down Trayburn as well before that radar sign. The addition of the stop signs as well as the radar signs, we've seen a great reduction just personally from being in the front yard, as well as seeing people slow down to the radar signs past our house. We've also seen before the stop signs were installed past our house, people speed up right past the radar sign. So we can definitely see from our perspective, as well as the data that was shown earlier today, that these radar signs are working and they have helped our peace of mind with having our kids out in our front yard, playing in our front yard, walking around with their neighbors. There's been a big turnover in the neighborhood in the past few years with a lot more young kids in and around the neighborhood, riding bikes, riding scooters, playing ball outside, as you see in these big neighborhoods. And we really think that these measures that the board and the city have put in place to reduce speeds are working, and we hope they continue to work as well. So I'm in support of these signs and hope they stay. Thank you.
Thank you. Please call the next speaker.
Laura Watton. Matt Walton. Would you want to speak? Okay. Would you like for me to read it for you? Okay. Stanley Kavelski.
Hello, I'm Stanley Kovaleski. I go by track, so some of the people out there might know me by track. But my wife and I live at 710 Hampton Trace Lane. That's in the Gulf section of White Columns. I think I'm a little unique. My wife and I are a little unique in White Columns in that we moved to the neighborhood 9 years ago, and that's not that unique. You heard another speaker speak of the same thing, but we moved in the neighborhood before we had kids, which kind of makes us like this unicorn of a person, right? Someone that moves to a neighborhood and then decides to have children. So we picked the neighborhood first, had a child. Now I've got an awesome little daughter. Her name's Catherine. She's 8 years old and just the love of my life. I've had a couple incidents since I've been in White Columns that have been near misses, both with Catherine in the car. And just to respond to the speaker that spoke a minute ago, kind of fired me up, okay? He said, how can you improve on 0%, right? You know how you can? It's by making everyone a little more careful, okay? Because if you have a near miss, if you ever had a near miss with your child in the car, you would take it more seriously. You would slow down, first of all. And second of all, you would try to do everything you could with regards to speed measures to slow down people in the neighborhood. For 9 years now, we've seen HOA boards take inaction, essentially do very little to control speed in the neighborhood. All the while, the neighborhood has grown. It's turned over. As Kyle had mentioned, it's gotten younger. We've gotten a lot more younger children in the neighborhood. They're playing outside. They're on their bikes, etc. I taught my daughter to ride her bike when she was about 5 years old, a little less than 5. Guess where I didn't teach her to ride her bike? In the neighborhood. I went somewhere else. I went outside of the neighborhood because I was concerned for her safety riding her bike in my own neighborhood. And that's just wrong. I think because I'm a tweener, I can kind of see this issue from both sides. You've got people that have children that are trying to do everything they can to protect them with regards to speed. And at the same time, I can understand people that have lived in the neighborhood for 20, 25 years, and they just want it the way they've always had it. 22 years, no incidents. That's one position. The other position is we can do better. We can avoid these type of incidences like I've almost had with my daughter. We can protect the citizens of White Columns, the citizens of Milton, and we ask for your help. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is that White Columns Country Club has grown in size significantly in the last 9 years. It's almost tripled in membership. We became members when I first moved in to today. White Columns Drive gets consistent traffic, and it seems like that's where most of the incidents take place. I think we owe it to the people of White Columns. I think that the city council owes it to the community to support the measure and to share the cost in the signs. To not do so would be a dereliction of duty. As a citizen of Milton, as a representative of the people here,
1 minute.
thank you. We owe it to everyone in the neighborhood to make it a safe and happy place to live. Thanks.
Thank you. Please call the next speaker.
Linda Howard, would you like me to read your position? On the card? Okay. And Jim Howard, you don't want to speak? Do you want to speak? Okay. Speed tables absolutely should not be installed. Let me back up, Mayor, my apologies. It's Jim Howard at 420 Highlands Manor Court. Speed tables absolutely should not be installed. Signs should be removed. They are a disgrace to the neighborhood and an eyesore to all. Okay, I would next, Mayor, like to, let me make sure. I've got this, you don't have your name on this one. You don't have your name. The fourth,
Do we have a name?
I'm sorry, I don't have it. I'll have to wait.
All right.
Brad Dell, I invite you to the podium.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Brad Dell. I live at 500 Glenhampton Drive in the Gulf section of the White Columns community, and I've been a resident of White Columns for 4 years. I am also a member of the board of White Columns Community Association. Speeding is a problem in White Columns, and as confirmed by the two most recent speed studies. It has long been a problem in White Columns as confirmed by prior speed studies, and it will continue to be a problem unless and until we all work together to solve it. That's why we are here. Our association wants to partner with our city officials to slow speeds and save lives. We are incredibly grateful for the city's professional staff who have worked with us over the past 12 plus months. With their guidance, we have followed the 4 specific parts of the city's ordinance code that outline the process for installing additional passive control measures to help slow speeds. They are as follows. Section 48-236, which says a traffic calming measure may be warranted on a local resident street if 50% or more of the total traffic is exceeding the posted speed limit. Multiple speed studies in the city's public works director confirmed that this threshold was exceeded and is still being exceeded to this day. Section 48-258, which says where a neighborhood or other defined study area has mandatory homeowners association or other league entity which may lawfully represent their position on such matters, this entity may act in lieu of the petition process as approved by the Public Works Director after consultation with the city attorney. The city's Public Works Director and the city attorney confirmed that we are a mandatory HOA before we move forward. Section 48-283, which says any work completed by the applicant within the right-of-way shall require right-of-way encroachment permit as directed by the Public Works Department. A right-of-way permit was applied for and issued by the city. As stated earlier by Ms. Leaders, this was done 6 months prior to the signs that were installed. This was confirmed by the city's Public Works Director at your May 2nd meeting. Finally arrived before the Milton City Council on May 2nd, and again tonight because of Section 48-281, which says basic installation of the traffic calming devices will be shared by the city 50% and the applicant 50%. This last section of the ordinance code has me confused. If the association did everything we are supposed to do and the code says the cost of the measures will be shared by the city, why can't we just move forward with the cost sharing agreement? Nonetheless, on May 2nd, the Milton City Council offered the cost sharing agreement and instead passed a motion or kicked the can that called for four more things. Another speed study completed, the installation of additional stop signs completed, reporting from the Milton Police Department on the number of speeding tickets issued and at what speeds completed, the conducting of another community survey to see what representation of the community is for and against, with a council's desire to achieve at least 50% +1 for approval from the community completed. A month ago, we sent a postage paid survey reply card to each homeowner in the Gulf section of White Columns. We mailed it to ensure delivery. And we provided a postage paid reply card for the convenience of each resident. As of today, 63% of Gulf residents support the newly installed signs to slow speeds and save lives. That more than exceeds the support threshold of 50% plus one established in your motion of May 2nd. We truly need your help, and I ask for your support. Thank you for your time and consideration. Now my personal issues with all of this. Okay, so let's talk 67% for a second. 67% of the residents that are here today, 2 rows back, live in the back of White Columns and don't see the speed like I do, because I live right on White Columns Drive, right by the 4-way stop. It's ridiculous. It's a racetrack. People are going 50 miles an hour plus 74 miles an hour. I can hear them rev their engines in their BMWs all the time. And I have 2 girls, both of them are sitting right back there, Harper and Reagan. And I joined this board to help slow speeds, to help save lives. And because if we lose one life by taking down these speed signs, it's not everybody, it's everybody's problem that would happen to. And the city, by removing those, would make a huge mistake. People run the 4-way stop all the time. Last week or a month ago, I saw a black convertible Mustang run the 4-way stop going 50 miles an hour and bottom out. And guess where it came from? It came from the back of the neighborhood. A lot of these people behind me today do not have children that are my children's age. Harper's going to be 9, Reagan's going to be 7. They all have children over the 18 years of age, so they don't care. And I don't care what the signs look like. I think they look good in downtown Alpharetta. They also have these signs where there's $3 million homes down there. So thank you. My time is up.
Thank you. Will you please call the next speaker?
Mayor, the next public comment is Amy Demiza, and I will read for her. The 4th sign on White Columns Drive violates ordinance because a flashing sign on the opposite side of a roadway creates distraction and a driving hazard on public street. Also, it should not have been in that location because traffic counts are less than 400 cars per day, because approximately 28 to 30 homes beyond generate destination traffic. Trayburn Manor also does not meet traffic criteria for a flashing sign. I'd like to next call Mr. Richard Harp to the podium, please.
Thank you. Richard Hart, 410 Highlands Manor Court. I'll be quick. I oppose the signs. Same reason everybody else does. They were put up illegally without proper questioning of the residents there. They did not get the proper input. They were put in improperly. I do agree with stop signs. I think they are exactly what was needed. You put them at the beginning of the entrance. I think the biggest problem is people coming in off Freemanville Road. They're going 40 to 60. When they turn into the neighborhood, they're still used to going a fast speed. I think the stop signs have made a big difference. Speed tables should never, ever be considered. Those are just a nuisance. Speed signs should be removed. I think if we keep watching the speeds, worst case, we would go with the second set of stop signs right in front of the clubhouse, maybe further down Trayburn View. But I think speed signs have made a difference. I think all of us old people here, I know we're old and decrepit, but we have gone through here with young kids too, on bikes and walking. So we do care. I just think stop signs is the best option. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Please call the next speaker.
Mayor, the next, and I believe final public comment card is from Denise Upton, and I will read her comment. She resides at 15370 White Columns Drive. We all want a safe community. The 6 stop signs that were approved months ago have recently been installed and are making a difference. Unfortunately, the HOA board purchased 4 speed radar signs costing over $15,000 at the end of 2021. They were purchased and installed without any community engagement and before getting a permit from the city. They do not meet statutory requirements. They are unnecessary and unwanted by many homeowners in the Gulf section, approximately 227 homes of White Columns. Perhaps a good resolution would be for all 4 of them to be removed to the second largest White Column section, the gated, with 128 homes. This is also where a majority of the HOA board members live, the ones who prematurely spent over $15,000 of homeowners association funds. Mayor, that concludes all the public comment cards that I have.
All right, thank you. Questions for staff?
Sarah? Comment on the traffic count requirement.
Sure. So let me see if I can have it on one of the slides. So this section of the code talks about local residential streets and sets some thresholds. And the way we have used this code in the past is more looking at the size of the neighborhood. Each house typically generates around 10 trips a day, which is if you're trying to reach a threshold of 400 trips a day as the minimum for qualifying for traffic calming funds, that would be like a 40-lot subdivision. And so we've looked at, instead of trying to do a traffic count at the very front of the neighborhood to capture, the most speeds for that neighborhood, we've looked at it more from a size of the neighborhood threshold. So neighborhoods of 40 lots and more would meet the requirement for potential matching funds for traffic calming. So the threshold is related to, again, to expend public funds to match on the traffic calming. So 400 to 4,000 cars a day is our range for defining streets that are eligible.
It seems like it's clearly worded in our ordinance. It sounds like what we've heard is people view it as per location where you're going to put the sign, 400 counts.
Right, it could use some clarification that if it is for any location that matching funds are requested, that it must meet this. And the last section of this slide just says volumes below 400 wouldn't typically provide enough benefit to warrant expenditure of public funds for installation and increased maintenance cost.
Okay. When White Columns, the board originally came forward back in 2021, as you were working through the process, some of the communication I saw talked about 2 traffic or speed radar signs. Is that really was that the intent as you were going through this? Then can you also talk about, so that would be the first question, was 2 the number that you originally working with versus the 4 that got installed?
The application that was submitted in July of 21 just referenced looking at the intersections from a stop sign warrant, and then it generally said partnering with the city on radar signs and other measures. Let me look at my dates here. So that was July that the application was submitted. In August, the HOA and city began talking about radar signs, and 2 was the number that was started with in August. In September, late September, the city and the HOA met both to look at the stop sign warrants as well as to look at locations for radar signs. And at that time, we came up with 4 possible locations. And so that's how we got to the 4 was at the end of September in the process.
Okay, in the 4 locations where they're installed now, are those the locations that the city recommended, and are they on the same side of the road, and are they monitoring the direction of traffic that the city said those would be effective to put in those?
So again, back to that end of September when we did the first field visit, we looked back at our historic traffic counts, which I had a map of that up earlier that showed everywhere we've counted. And we looked at both Trayburn Manor and White Columns Drive, and we're originally recommending 1 going each direction on each of those, somewhere that we had close to where we had done traffic counts. So we based it on data we had from past speed studies and traffic counts. And originally we're looking at, again, one on each side of the road for those 2 road segments.
It wasn't 4 scattered throughout the neighborhood the way it's set up right now. Including, and I've driven through there, I've taken a look at the signs, trying to get an idea of what was installed.
And one of them clearly seems like it's backwards. We heard a couple people reference that when it's on the left-hand side of the road, monitoring oncoming traffic to the back of the subdivision. I think that's at the very back of maybe White Columns Drive. Was that even a thought to put it in that location? Was that something where Roddy or the staff actually said, this is a good thing to do, this is a smart place to put it if you want to do traffic calming?
That one in particular, we looked at the stop sign warrants. We didn't complete that study until mid-December. So we had already talked about, 2 locations on Trayburn, 2 on White Columns Drive. And then once we realized that there were going to be stop signs going in, that changed the effectiveness of where we had proposed the 2 signs on Trayburn Manor before. So that's why there's only 1 on Trayburn Manor, and the other was relocated to a nearby location to where we had counted further into the neighborhood on White Columns Drive.
The 2, once you put the stop signs in, the location of the stop signs, it kind of negated
It did.
the need for where you saw those speed traffic monitoring or radar signs to actually be effective. But the signs are not placed in, they're still placed in different areas, not the original placement before the stop signs.
Really just one moved substantially from where it was originally looked at.
Okay, and I've just got a couple other questions. In the past, when we've done traffic calming device or approvals, have we ever done anything with speed signs where we did not require or request the 67%, so we get a super majority of the people that are going to be impacted by the signs to give input by the number of households? Have we ever done that in the city before?
Yes. Let's see if I've got the list of neighborhoods here. We've had 2 different other locations that have done radar signs as their traffic calming measure. One was a city cost sharing, city installed, and HOA acting as the in place of the petition, and that was in Kennewick. And then we had another instance where the neighborhood purchased and installed the signs and just provided a indemnity and maintenance agreement. They didn't request a cost share, and that was in Hopewell Plantation. So we did give them a permit, and again, the HOA acted on behalf of the neighborhood. So was your question, have we ever used the 67%, or have we ever allowed it? In both cases, we've allowed the HOA to represent the community in the installation of those 2 sets of signs.
And then the last question I've got has to do with the cost sharing process. Don't we generally, are we involved when we do cost sharing, involved in the quoting and the bidding process? And is that supposed to be an upfront process and application versus after something is purchased and installed? Because in this case, I think we've heard the board actually purchased the signs before we had approved locations and approved the things. So now they have 4 signs that they've purchased. Now, in May, we have them come forward asking for cost sharing. Were we even involved in the negotiation of the prices of the signs, like our process, our ordinance requires to do it upfront versus post-approval?
We had recently bid a base model radar sign and purchased 10 of them to use throughout the city. So we had a bid and price on what we considered would be a basic model. So if White Columns had wanted to go with that model, we would have contributed 50% of that cost. The exact number that's how we determine the maximum amount we could contribute to this cost share agreement. It's not exactly 50% of what the signs cost or the installation, but that's how we determined what a reasonable and bid price for a radar sign would be. So we did the bidding separately. We did it to purchase our own signs, but it provided us a number that we used as that base cost.
But I guess my question is really from a process standpoint, because we're deliberating over post or on the back end, trying to do a reimbursement. Is that what our process requires? Is our process that you work with them, you do that, they show you what you want, we do the cost of installation, we do the bid, and then aren't we usually the ones that are driving that process once they come forward to us versus being asked on the back end after they've already installed the signs to do 50/50 as well as the maintenance?
We've done the cost share where we've actually installed the signs. This was not something that we'd bid before as this decorative sign. So in instances where HOAs have done something beyond the base, we've not gone back and done a cost share agreement.
Right, and I do understand. I think I read through what shows in the thing in our ordinance that in fact will consider cost sharing. You apply for it on the front end. We're involved in the bid process. I guess my question is just a straightforward question. Did they follow our process in actually working with the city on the process, or did they in fact acquire the signs before we had been engaged in looking at cost sharing and doing?
We did discuss it early on, but they did move forward with the purchase prior to us.
So they purchased them on their own, which in the past, you can do a decorative sign, you can do whatever. And if the neighborhood wanted to basically pay for that themselves, and we approved this as a speed reduction or a traffic calming thing, at that point, that would be their cost versus a city coming back in. That was my question, is did they follow the process? They're asking now. Heard the concern of a number of the people, but I was just curious if I followed that process. It sounds like they did not.
Right, yes, they moved ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Sarah, quick question. Rick brought up a point. So everything you were reading was in regards to public funds. Is it safe to say if the HOA wasn't asking for the $6,853, would council wouldn't be deciding this, correct? This would just be a public works decision, is that correct?
There would still be an indemnity and maintenance agreement. And we've done those in the past. When we first started doing them, the city actually didn't sign off on them because it was the HOA saying, we're going to take responsibility and maintenance and take care of these measures that aren't your standard measure. I believe in our most recent indemnity agreements, even though we don't have anything we're committing to in it, we do have them signed as almost a ratification. And Ken's office has helped us review those in the past. We've done a couple of the indemnity agreements. Again, it just allows something that's privately maintained to be allowed to be in the right of way. So there would still be an agreement, but not for the cost share component.
Thank you. And then one question. So I know one of the speakers said, so we deferred this on 4 items. And I mean, I might need Steve or Ken's help on this one. The 4 items we deferred on, if you could kind of go over that and the results on those 4 items.
So you have them in the presentation, correct?
I do.
I was curious what what's a community survey one?
Made her mouth dry.
So the speed study, that was,
So what was the HOA results?
that I believe was emailed by the HOA. They summarized the number of responses they've had and the percentage rate. So I didn't include that in this presentation, but I believe it was in a document provided by the HOA.
Someone, do we have that at all? It was one of the deferral requests. I was curious what the HOA survey results were.
I think he said 65%.
All right, thank you. Okay. 63, is that for or against, Sarah? For. All right, that was for Sarah. All right, Dan?
Sarah, my concern is with the fact that they put them in before, it was definitely city approved. or at least more permanent guidance. If you were to go into this neighborhood and do the traffic studies, would you have just put in 2 of those signs, or would you have recommended 4, from your professional opinion, when you look at the situation in White Columns?
Based on our past count data, which is here, up. Given the length of distance between the count locations, I mean, usually we count at a location where a measure could be considered applicable, eligible, warranted. So again, the number 5 and 6 are a little close together. That was just a matter of counting it closer to the bottom of the hill versus a little further into the neighborhood. And same thing with 3 and 4, they're a little close, but given the size of and length of these roadways, 4 would be a reasonable number to consider to address both Traburn Manor and White Columns Drive.
And you would have agreed with the location of those 4 signs where they're at today?
Yes, within, similar spacing and layout to these count stations that we have in the neighborhood.
Ken, I've got a kind of a crazy question for you.
Never a crazy question.
These signs, they have messaging on the bottom.
Yes.
And I went and looked at them today, and they flash as you go by. So if you go the speed, I think if you go under the speed, it says welcome or no, thank you, something like that. And it changes. My concern is the HOA controls the messaging on that. If it goes crazy and becomes distracting, and an individual in there had an accident because the sign was distracting, is the city responsible and liable, or is the HOA liable?
That's a very specific fact pattern, and it's going to depend upon the facts leading up to that. I will say that what we're talking about here is signage on city property, part of the city street system, and the city has control over that. In fact, even our ordinance and even the right of entry agreement that you have in front of you is very clear that city staff have the right basically at any time to direct that the signs be removed. And that is that is part of the fact that we ultimately are going to be responsible for what we put up as a traffic control device. What I would look to for my engineers, my experts, was to make sure that the traffic sign comports with the MUTCD. I'm assuming that it does, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Safety Control Devices. I'm assuming that it does, and if that is in fact the case, I have little concern from a liability standpoint at this point. Now, Sarah comes to me or the city manager comes to me later and indicates that there's a problem. There's been sort of either a lack of maintenance, such that the signs no longer are serving their purpose, or they in fact have a distracting message on them. And they seek my advice. I'm going to say if it makes the situation less safe, let's take them down. Or it'll be take that message off or put them back to their original default settings, whatever that may be. But I think that's something we'll just have to monitor, assuming what the city does tonight, which I don't want to get ahead of you all. You all have the decision to make later. But it's a point, and yes, we are ultimately responsible for our city maintenance and our city right-of-way. But as long as my engineers are happy with the messaging on these boards, I don't see a problem.
Councilmember Burrow?
Sarah, I have questions for you. Sorry. Can you put that speed study back up? Not that, I'm sorry, the map. So sign number 1, is that the location where the sign was actually installed, where the speed data was collected?
No, it's not the location where the sign was installed. It was further into the neighborhood.
Okay, and looking at where our other signs are installed, where the speed data was collected, are those the locations where the signs were actually installed?
They are relatively close.
So,
yes.
so why is the number one sign not in the location where the speed study, why is it installed in a different location than where the speed study was conducted? And is there an option to move that sign to a different location?
That was the one that was relocated, or it was one of the last ones marked for installation. And I don't know the exact reasoning that it was moved further around the corner. It might have been to give, the signs usually don't want to be able to see them for a long period of time. You kind of want them to almost jump out at you as you're coming around a corner to catch your eye and realize what speed you're traveling. So that could have had something to do it to move it a little further around that corner. And
on the opposite side of the street, though. So that's the funky sign that I'm having a problem with.
Right.
And if there was a location closer to the club, that made sense. That did not, there looks like some wooded area there. I don't know if that was an option for where that sign could have been placed.
We haven't discussed that with the HOA yet, but could be something that we could look at moving that one possibly.
I had a few more questions. You mentioned that the HOA collects the data from the signs, and these are city streets. Maybe I missed that. Why does the HOA collect the data, and why did they control the messaging?
So the data is just available if they want to collect it at certain points. And part of the agreement included sharing that data with the city at any time. It's just a way for them to get more information about, guessing about the times of day that speeding happens. It might help them with some education measures that they may utilize in their neighborhood communications on, just some speed statistics at the signs.
Okay, and they control the messaging on that as well?
Yes.
I think I had one other question. I think that was it. I just had some comments, but I can save those for later. Thanks.
Any other questions for Sarah? Rick?
Sarah, could you put that map back up that showed the speed study?
This one.
That one right there. Can you show me where, when you said you originally recommended 4, were there 2 essentially in the same locations on each of the street, one facing one way, one facing the other, or were they spaced different places the way those signs are installed today?
Don't recall exactly if they were right next to each other. I know there was one close on Trayburn Manor to Hallbrook where the multi-way stop was installed. So we wound up with one kind of near 5 and 6. So the other may have been further into the neighborhood on Trayburn Manor. On White Columns Drive, I know we'd always talked about at least one on the section between Trayburn and Hampton Bluff, Glen Hampton. So something in that section because there weren't a lot of houses that front that section of road, and it just feels more open. And the other was going to be looking kind of on the approach to the country club property. So whether they were exact opposite each other, those were kind of the 2 general areas that we had looked at, though.
As far as that, when you looked at the actual speed study data, are the higher speeds that we see, is it more on that entrance leading up to the clubhouse, like in from Freemanville? And then did you guys recommend doing one for both directions so we slow people as they exit too, or is there no concern as people exit?
Like our highest number out of all these counts was at location 4, or no, sorry, at location 3, just coming down off the hill and approaching. There is a stop sign already at Hampton Bluff and Glen Hampton. So that looks like, out of all the data we've collected over the last 6 years that that was our highest speed location.
Is that where we gave most of the tickets also?
The speeding tickets, I don't know that we have exactly where those two were located.
He's not here.
Yeah, he was here.
He was here, but he's not here now.
I've got an Excel file that has a coordinate associated with those speeding citations. We can see what that, where that.
Brent, I think it's
Exactly was
going off from
located.
what Andrew had asked too. As far as the design standards, I know we have strict design standards for what we require for all different types of signs. Stop signs, size of sign, height of sign. These seem kind of unique. I've never seen anything like this in the city of Milton with, what are the color? I've seen red, green. What are the other colors they've got on these signs?
You know, the speed limit will flash one color, and then the message, depending on the speed, will do red or green.
What about height of the sign? I'm just going by some of the people that sent notes that were concerned. Part of it was the multicolored thing. The other thing was also the size of those. I know we have a minimum height where the sign has to be placed. I think 7 feet so that people can't walk under it and hit it. And we have to have breakaway poles inside. What about the overall height? These seem a little bit taller than what I've even seen on the main Freemanville and different places we put our own up. Do you have any design standards for interior signs within neighborhoods?
There is a maximum height on the sign as well, that can be on I believe the type of mount those are on. It could be, the messaging part of the sign could be adjusted, and a supplemental speed limit sign could be added to that post as well. But there is a maximum height. I want to say it's 14 feet, but there is a maximum to the top of the sign height.
That height would include any type of like solar panel or whatever?
It would not, just the sign itself for visibility, to see the message on the sign.
That's for another time, but I think we need to take a look possibly as a council for future, if we ever run into this again, what is it that we want to see actually a little bit more restrictive? And you'd said that we had 2 examples where we did use the HOA board allowing to just make decisions. Those were on were those smaller neighborhoods that?
So we've done that. The 2 I referenced were just related to radar signs. We've also used that mechanism for speed tables. And we've had, I think there were 6 neighborhoods that have used city funds. Let's see, we've had 6 neighborhoods that have used city funding and use the HOA's authority to, in place of the petition process. So that has been, yes, passed on using city funds.
I guess that's something I had always heard, and that's why I was a little surprised in the last meeting, that signs were already installed without having an official survey. And reading through the ordinance, I see where that is an option that's in there, where you have a mandatory HOA. And I think in every subdivision I know of in Milton, they are mandatory HOAs. It's not an option when you live in a subdivision with an HOA. But I always thought, just like the one previous board president had mentioned, that they were told it was 67%. So you had to have a super majority of people actually on that street that agree. That's I guess the process I've been aware. I didn't know that we did the other. It looks like we made a couple of exceptions on the signs. And one last question, and maybe staff would have. The percentage, when we said that survey was 63%, that was 63%. What number, how many homes do we have in that section that should have had a chance to turn the survey in? How many turned in the survey, and that 63% is on what base?
I can get that number or the.
I just, because numbers can be misleading. Could be 63% of what base. when we usually use approval levels, we want to know what's the whole neighborhood, whether or not they voted or didn't vote, what percentage of that base really voted for or against.
I will echo that. I was curious on if you had actually reviewed the survey results, and if we've seen the survey results, and then as what Council Member Morrig said, how many responded, and break down that 63% of how many actually responded compared to how many homes are in the club area.
Hey, Steve, will you get that for us?
I'm going to review what the motion was last time, but I don't recall that that was staff's responsibility. Let me dig through what we said. I believe the motion was for asking them for a voluntary survey. I don't think that was something that staff
That's what
was
it was.
expecting to check on or present. So I'm just pulling that up now.
Thank you.
Sarah, on that, I keep calling it the fourth speed sign, the one that's on white columns at the end. We haven't talked about the fact that it's on the opposite side of the street facing, so it really should have been facing the other way. Why is it still, in my opinion, the wrong way if we're giving them guidance?
The signs do have to, point at the direction that vehicles will be traveling to it to register the speed. And so that location was approaching a curve. And as the vehicle's coming around the curve, it's going to pick up, the radar from the sign is going to pick up the vehicle and give a little more notice than if it was on the same side as the vehicle's traveling. It's on the inside of the curve versus the outside. Let me see if I can.
It didn't seem like it was on that big of a curve to me, and it just seems like you're not used to looking over there for speed information. It just seems awkward.
Right. Typically, they are the other three locations. Actually, the one got pulled up now that was rotated since our last meeting. You'll see the cursor there. This one was facing the other direction as well. It was facing for cars coming into the neighborhood versus those leaving the country club. So this one has been rotated, correct? So,
But not the one up top.
right,
But the one
correct.
up top is still.
It has not been. Yes.
And your recommendation is to leave it the way it is?
We would be open to allowing it to be rotated and to again get the vehicles as they're leaving that area of the neighborhood instead of going into it.
I think that was when you said that was not one of the locations that staff suggested. You wouldn't have suggested putting it on the opposite side facing oncoming traffic. I would think that would be more of a safety issue because you're more likely to look, and where you follow with your eyes, many times that's where you're going to start.
So right, the traffic count location was further in, and again, as part of the field layout, it was moved more interior, but that count station was further in.
Steve, you have that?
So the motion, the fourth part of that motion was to strongly encourage the White Columns HOA to conduct a community survey to see what representation of the community is for or against. Council desire is to achieve at least 50% plus one for an approval from the community. So that would have been, I would have expected that they would have brought that up, and it sounds like they did today.
Okay.
I guess I was just curious. I think staff got what we asked. I was just curious how many people responded, because they used the percentage of 63%, which clearly is above 50 plus one. I'm just wondering how many people truly responded out of the total people.
Perhaps, Ken, if it's the council's wish and we're allowed to, we could bring the speaker back up.
They've got that.
Well, do we have the results that were emailed to us, or would council want to hear the speaker? I mean, it doesn't matter to me at this point.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, okay, what's the base?
Yeah. Is council okay with that?
How many
invite the
homes in
speaker.
that whole
Who was the
section?
speaker on that? You didn't, and Mr. Hollingsworth, I know you didn't turn in a comment
not.
card, so I need you to take a seat real
Okay.
quick. Who was the speaker on that? Tammy?
Can you help me with who the board member was that
Mr.
spoke?
Dell?
This gentleman here.
I think it was Mr. Braddell.
Is that,
I think.
okay, Mr. Dell?
72 total ballots, 45 for, and then what is it? 27 no.
How many homes are in that section that we're surveying? How many were
227.
they sent out?
227?
227 homes in that section of White Columns. Got a response of 72 out of the
And how many were for, you said?
What did you say?
45.
45 and 27.
45 for 4 and then 26 no.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Any other questions for Sarah or council discussion? Audrey?
Yes.
Sarah? All right. Mr. Hollingsworth? Have a seat, please. All right, Sarah?
Can you pull up,
Councilmember Verhoff has a question.
sorry, one more. I forgot to ask you. Can you pull up the map one more time? I specifically want to look at the one on Trayburn. The next one that shows yes. Okay, so in 2016, number 6, is the number below both of those, the traffic count 307 and 385?
Right, that ADT is the direction going, or the number of vehicles going that direction.
Okay. And to install a traffic calming device, we typically look at 400.
And usually we're looking, this is a little unique because the radar sign only addresses one direction, but usually with measures, we're looking at the road. So we're looking both directions. So in this case, it would be, typically it would be the 397 plus the 385 would be that section of roadways, what we call the ADT, average
Okay.
daily traffic. With a radar sign, it is only, really only addressing one direction. So you're correct that for only the heading into the neighborhood is the 385 cars a day.
Okay.
From
And do
2016.
our current speed studies show different ADTs?
It was close. Here's the slide that shows the bottom 3 numbers are
Okay.
the
345.
ADTs. Yeah. And those can vary by day or
Yeah.
by, summer versus in
Vacation,
school.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Sarah? Okay, council discussion. I think it's, I know we've heard a lot about removing the signs. I think it's very important that we all know that on our agenda tonight is just the cost sharing. If council wants to remove signs at some future date, that's going to be a future agenda item. Ken, can you correct me on that?
I agree. And secondly, code speaks in terms of really that being a staff function in conjunction with the city manager. In fact, it says the city reserves the right to remove traffic calming devices for any reason. On approval by the city manager, the public works director may order the applicant to remove a traffic calming measure in accordance with subsection C. So, I mean, again, going back to the notion that this is a city function, city right-of-way, city's in control, and if the city engineer and the city manager have a concern, they have the right to order removal.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my follow-up question, can an HOA or future HOAs, they have the authority to remove the signs if they foul?
The code speaks to that as well, and they have the right to seek to have them removed. And there's an actual process in the ordinance for that.
All right, thank you. Okay, council discussion.
So essentially what?
We're voting on $6,853.
That's all we're voting on at this point, is whether or not we're going to do the cost sharing.
Yep. I think we deferred it for those 4 reasons. I personally don't feel like anything in those 4 reasons say us that we don't do the cost share, but that's just me. I'm open to everyone's opinion and discussion. Councilman Johnson?
I'm going to agree, but that 4th sign, is there, I mean, if we all agree to move that, would that be?
We probably can't do, and Ken, we probably cannot direct removement, but we can probably direct Public Works to reevaluate that. Would that be fair?
I don't want the council to take official action on that, but I think if that's the consensus, your staff is pretty good at picking up on what the council wants it to do. That's not in the way of a formal vote. And my trepidation on that issue is simply because removal of signs is not on the agenda. The agenda is very clear. It is the approval of this right of entry. But I think that to the extent you're discussing it, I think your city manager is pretty good at getting where you want to go, and we'll act accordingly.
That sign number 1 on the map, is that
It is.
correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess other question too, if we want to change or review the ordinance like we've done with others, if we think that we're going to avoid issues like we're dealing with this, we could actually have that come forward, take a look, do a work session, change it so we're not, so if we think there's a better way to do it for neighborhoods, including those with HOAs, maybe put a little bit more teeth in or change the direction of what we want.
I would 100% agree with us doing a work session, a feature on that.
The only comment I got as far as the funding, we've got a process that says you're supposed to work with us. We're supposed to, the city staff is supposed to go out, do the bid. If I read through, and it sounds like they went ahead and purchased signs on their own, which they can do if they get approval to install them. Question is, are we going to do this for any time that we do traffic calming devices? And do we make an exception? And every time it's like, well, you can come in later and ask for it, and we'll allocate the funds, including the maintenance going forward. That's my concern. Is there's a process? Is there a reason for the process? I think it's so the city staff can be involved, even though we have a comparative bid. The question is, was this a process that they should have followed, and would that have alleviated some of this?
I think the issue is there was a process, and I think it started in July from what Sarah said. And I think there was a mutual discussion going on between both parties is kind of my assumption. And I'm not going to say you assumed this would have been approved, but I think there was a working relationship there with the HOA. But I think the process was followed, and we deferred it for the 4 items. The 4 items seemed like everything was fulfilled, so I'm in support of it, with the one caveat that Councilmember Johnson said. But I'm open up for any more discussion.
Back to the process. I know a lot of the conversation started in July, moved into August. They discussed 2 radar signs. Then in September, the city and the HOA talked about 4 possible locations. So I understand a lot of the conversations were happening. But if we look at the dates of when the permit was actually given, when the signs were installed, the signs were installed prior to the permit. So for me, I like to see a process. They're there for a reason. We have non-standard signs now in place there that maybe they were purchased with the assistance of Sarah, offering what signs are standard. These other signs may not have been purchased. So non-standard signs didn't follow the process, I guess, to a T. That's kind of what I'm struggling with right now.
Eric, can you go over that for us again? Just when the permit was applied for, when it was approved.
The signs are purchased.
Everything. And how does this different from the other, how many different right-of-way permits that we get over the course of the?
Okay, so the application was submitted in July to review the HOA for the traffic calming program. And then we, started talking about number of signs over the months of August, September. In November, the HOA emailed that they've received 4 radar signs that they ordered. And so at that point, we were doing another field visit to determine the best location for those 4 signs to be most effective. During that time, we were also still doing the stop sign warrant. We had a third party assist with that just to review it from a safety aspect. So we were waiting on the results of that, and that didn't come until mid-December, at which time we notified that one of the locations we talked about previously would need to be adjusted. In January, that was adjusted. In February 8th, Public Works staff did a confirmation of the markings of where those signs were, all of them that were proposed, as well as the stop signs. We have stop signs, and then we have some stop ahead signs just because of the visibility approaching the stops. So all those sign locations were verified in February, and then the work to start the installation began in March, mid-March, and was completed late April. So the code says any work completed by the applicant within the right-of-way shall require a right-of-way encroachment permit as directed by the Public Works Department. And with our coordination over 6 months worth of talking about these signs, verifying the locations, field marking them, that was our direction to proceed with installation. The permit was just the final button at the end to ensure that all the elements were met with the installation. So that happened in late April, was the completion of the signs as well as the final permit signed by the HOA and the city Public Works.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. All right, any other discussion? Okay, well, I will open it for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we deny approval of agenda item number 22-152.
Is there a second? Okay, I'd like to make a motion. We approve agenda item number 22-152 with the one caveat, allowing our Public Works Department, given their expertise, to look at sign location number 1 and reevaluate that.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion from myself and a second from Councilmember Johnson to approve agenda item 22-152 with the caveat of what I just said. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Councilmember Ward opposed. All right, thank you. That will conclude that agenda item. All right.
You know, the whole issue there, my problem with that.
We'll move on to reports and presentations. Is that correct, Tammy?
Analyze everything.
Okay.
There was a motion to take out the signs.
Greg, here we go.
Good time. Hey,
Mayor, that next item is presentation of results from Milton's 2022 version of the National Community Survey. Our Communications Director, Mr. Greg Botello.
Hello, maybe I'll give a moment for people to clear up, but I'm here to talk about the National Community Survey, which I briefed you all and talked to you about earlier, but just kind of give a big recap before we get into the meaty, kind of the juicy, fun stuff, I guess. So every 2-3 years, our city and hundreds of other cities around the country, ranging from the age of the size from about 1,000 to 4 million, but generally more closer to our areas, our size, take this survey, which has many common questions, so it helps us measure ourselves against hundreds of other cities. We also were able to measure ourselves against how Milton residents viewed views from the past. So it's one of the things that makes this kind of unique and kind of useful is that this results are statistically significant, which is unlike just a general online poll where anyone could take it. They're representative random samples that are measured by polling experts. So, and in terms of why these are valuable to Milton, many parts of our strategic plan and generally kind of point to this as a kind of the tool that we can measure how residents feel about certain topics. It can kind of guide what we're doing well, what we can work on, what challenges we face, what we could add or subtract, and where best to invest our time and resources. So it's very useful in that respect. But there's also kind of limits to it. One, it measures a point in time. So this was actually conducted between March 10th and May 13th. So this is how how representative households, how they felt at that time. Those opinions could have changed. You know, they might be different now, but still. We had a 16% response rate, which is good, not great. There's a 5% margin of error, sometimes called the confidence interval. So therefore, when you'll see a little later, if there's kind of within a kind of a few percentage points, generally from a statistics standpoint, those are basically seen as equal. You can't 2% is not, end all be all. There's some other factors here. I'm not going to go through everything here, but especially for all these different results. But I did want to give you a broad sense of, what kind of people are represented here. And generally, what I'm going to kind of focus on are the examples that are kind of stand out, whether we're much very high percentile, which is kind of, of the top 1%, 99 percentile, we're in the top 1% of the, if we're the 1% of all the different communities that are measured here. There's also rank. So if there's 400 communities or citizens ask the same exact question, if we're ranked number 1, that means we stood up more than any of the other ones, and conversely, the other side. I also have here the how we can compare to past Milton surveys. So the Milton residents kind of feel better or worse about a certain thing compared to when they took it in 2019, 2016, and 2014. So now I'm going to just jump to kind of the results. Generally, overall, Milton rated very well overall on most measures. You can kind of see this here. I'm not going to go through everything like that, but then the percent positive, which is, the kind of the top, very satisfied, think of it as very satisfied or very favorable or favorable. Our numbers were generally did not change very much compared to 2019. And I would say the 96th percentile for quality of life is pretty outstanding. I think you kind of go down the board. Image reputation is 97th percentile. That is extremely high. One of the things I think is a new question to ask about the sense of civic and community pride, that we're in the 92nd percentile. That means that out of, only 8% of citizens from other cities had a higher sense of civic pride. And I think that's something that we should note, and it's a good baseline. So I won't go into every single thing, but these numbers, when you have 96% positive, a place to live, that's very high. And that's something that we have a good baseline. And at the same time, it hasn't really changed much over time. So I also have this slide on what city government, there's certain things that city government controls and certain things that government does not control that are part of the survey. So I kind of pulled out some of the things that we do control. One is I think the fact that we're the 97th percentile in terms of customer service by city employees is pretty remarkable. So I think, we talk about service in our strategic plan values, and that's an instance that people live by it. One thing that we're down 10%, quality of city service provided. I think we could speculate one of the questions later on. This could be quality of city services that are provided. Also, it could also be interpreted by the respondent in terms of services that we don't provide. For example, trash and recycling. You can't necessarily get in the minds of every single person, but that can be interpreted various ways. But generally, you'll see that most people think we're acting in the community's best interest as a city government, and most people approve of the direction that Milton is taking, and that's not always the case in other city governments. And even value city service or taxes paid, well, that is 67%, which is not, it could be higher, I suppose, but that's still up 7% than it was the last time this was taken. So this slide talks about kind of business economy related items. So you'll see that there's a few ways these questions were asked. So one is importance of residential commercial design layout. So that's, people were asked, how important is this to you? So apparently there's 287 communities over the last few years have been asked this question. The numbers vary because this is a relatively new question, and Milton ranked number 1. So that means our residents feel strongly about that. Residential, like how different our neighborhoods and our commercial areas are laid out. The actual, generally we do very well in that, but and that doesn't mean we're certainly not ranked number 1 in terms of how it is laid out, but still. You can see all these other measures. Generally the things that have gone kind of jump out to me in terms of the cost of living. People sense of the cost of living here is down 15% from the previous years. It's still 36th percentile, which is perhaps not surprising, but not something we would love to see in the shopping. And for some whatever reason, people think the shopping opportunities have gone down. one of the things I think is really significant, especially in light of some other things, so that when this was conducted in the spring, only 23% of people responded as expected positive growth in the family income. So 36% thought they would go backwards. So, and that's compared to in 2019, where, you know, that's a 36% difference. That's a pretty big difference. So one of the kind of categories is it's called mobility. So generally, there's kind of two ways to look at this thing. In terms of, one is compared to previous surveys, ease of travel, especially by car, has gone up significantly. People think that it is higher, but at the same time, Milton is in the middle ground for a lot of these factors in terms of just like the 55th percentile in traffic flow, which is kind of middle ground, but still better than it was, you know, a few years ago. Two areas that we kind of rank considerably lower than the national average is ease of travel by bike. That's something that has come up repeatedly, even if it hasn't really necessarily changed much. For Milton over time, it is something that we don't measure in the same way as other cities. And public transport's another one too. So this is one of the most striking results. So there's some context here. So in around January of last year, several of our major trash and recycling providers had issues with staffing, and there was some complaints about whether recycling was picked up, and sometimes trash and sometimes other things. For some areas that persisted for several months, including when this was conducted from March to certainly into April. So, but at the same time, you can see that these numbers are striking in terms of, these are things that the city does not directly control. We don't directly control garbage collection or waste pickup or recycling, but the people's opinion of them has plummeted, at least this survey compared to 2019. We were the first percentile for garbage collection. Much lower than the national benchmark, much lower than the national benchmark for all these things. So this also, again, because this could be a moment in time, maybe people think about it differently now, but in last spring, this is what the scientifically significant sample of people, how they thought. Generally, onto public safety and crime. Generally, people feel very positively about our police and fire services, and people feel very safe. Not much statistically significant difference between previous years, but I think our crime and data backs this up, that this is people feel like this is a safe community, and for good reason. So there's also I came before council before about establishing some unique questions beyond the ones that every community. So these are questions that are only asked to Milton residents. One of them was and some of them are informed by our strategic plan. For example, our website online services, that was something our strategic plan noted. Apparently we got 80% across the board as being favorable, which is what it is. That was mostly to establish a baseline, but there's some other ones I'm going to walk through one by one that could be very interesting for you all. One is how much a priority, if any, should be placed on the following options for Milton's recreation, parks, and cultural spending. So the runaway winner, people could select more than one. Nature trails, that's 94% of people think that should be a high priority. So people were asked high priority, that's very high priority, high priority, like no priority, and going down the line. The other four were grouped very tightly together between gym, indoor athletic facility, performance center, sports fields, and outdoor athletic courts, but those still between 66 and 73%. So it's a pretty comparable grouping, but generally people thought it was they were high priorities for all of them. So another question we had, which was basically, would you support increasing taxes through a bond for the following? So for either in active parks, which we had 69% at that time, and for passive, another basically green space bond, which was 80%. Again, this was at a time when most people thought their income would go down over the next 6 months, but still there was pretty widespread support for that. So, and another thing too, in the unique question, which I think there's so many details, about 22% of respondents, they had to single out one thing, mentioned adding more green space, parks, or trails. This last question speaks to the recycling, which we had seen in the previous kind of the standard survey, which everyone takes from all the different communities, what support for recycling options. So how much support would you support support or opposed, they're asked to rank each of these are basically individual questions. So 39% supported the status quo. The highest response by far, which was supported by, was a regional recycling center with cost share by government. So I'm not going to go into all these things. Just you can kind of see it here, but they are certainly telling. And there's people are supportive of different options. So you could also pick more than one of those options. So that's kind of those are the last highlights. This is a 102-page survey, which you have in your emails if you want to look through it. I just try to pull out some of the highlights, and this is really just a tool for you all to use. This is not, scientific surveys are really useful, but they can change over time as anyone's followed political polling. And some things we can influence easily, and some others we cannot. So I just wanted to share that with you and share that publicly, and thank everyone who participated in this survey. So thank you. Any questions or thoughts?
Thanks, Greg. This really helps with our strategic plan for sure.
Yes.
And everything moving forward. Questions for Greg?
Is there any way to tell geographically where pockets were?
Well, we did ask for that. I think when we had 450 responses, the margin of error would be like basically 10-15%. That was so we did ask for that. If we had like a 60% or 50% response rate, which would be rare, but if we didn't want to present it when you have like a 25% or something very high, because the margin of error would vary by
too much
by things like that. So anything else?
That's good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's done with reports and presentations. We'll move on to the public hearing. Will the city clerk please stay on the item?
Mayor, we're going to move on to first presentation first, and then we'll do public hearing.
Where am I on here?
First
You
presentation.
skip first.
Number 8. Let me read that for you, Mayor. It's
Hold on, let me go
considering.
here. I want to make sure I'm on the right one here. So
Number
we
8.
just did, I'm on page 9.
Page
Reports and
11.
presentations.
Or 8.
All right, 11's gone. Go for it. Here it is. All right, move on to first presentation. Will the city clerk please sound the item? There we
Absolutely,
go.
Mayor. That item is consideration of an ordinance for the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to establish the ad valorem tax rate of the city of Milton for fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes. It is agenda item number 22235. Our assistant city manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville. Sorry, we don't do anything on that, Mayor. See, I was testing Stacy.
There we go.
Mayor, can we go on to motion and vote, please?
Yep, we do not have public comment. I'll
This
open
is
it
like
for a
the
motion.
Farkles.
I know, every time we mess up with the
I
agenda.
am on it. I just, I love to keep y'all on your toes.
10 minutes before the meeting is always tough, so, all right. First presentation, so open up for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion. I make a motion that we approve first presentation as read.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Moore, and a second from Councilmember Jacobus to approve the first presentation. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. All right. So now we'll go on to page 12. So we'll go into our public hearing. Will the city clerk please stay on the item?
Absolutely, Mayor. It's consideration of an ordinance for the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to establish the ad valorem tax rate of the city of Milton for fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes. It's agenda item number 22235. And for real, it's now going to be Assistant City Manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Thank you, City Clerk. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We are here this evening to discuss setting the calendar year 2022 millage rate, which will fund fiscal year 2023 activity. This is the first of 3 required public hearings, and we will go into the details of those requirements a little later in the presentation. First, we have the agenda for this public hearing. We will go over some important definitions, followed by the state's requirements for the public hearings and advertisements regarding setting a millage rate. Next, we will discuss millage rate options. Please keep in mind, you can approve any millage rate up to the legal cap of 4.731. Staff advertises at the capped millage rate to allow council the flexibility to select any rate up to and including the capped millage rate. And we will discuss how this relates to the fiscal year 2023 budget that has been prepared later in this presentation. Following the millage rate overview, we will break down the digest by category and show the taxes that would be levied at the capped millage rate, a midpoint millage rate, and the rollback millage rate, which will be followed up by a review of the draft general fund budget summary for fiscal year 2023. After that, we will look at some ways property owners can reduce their tax liability, how to calculate a tax bill, and finally, the value of your tax dollars as a Milton taxpayer. Before you, we have some samples of definitions that help understanding of the terminology that we use throughout the presentation. First, we have a mill, which is $1, there goes my thing, per $1,000 of assessed property value, or 0.001 times your assessed value. The fair market value is the estimate of the market value of the property as determined by the Fulton County Board of Assessors. That's really important to know. It's not your Zestimate or maybe any other information from a real estate agent. It is the Fulton County Board of Assessors fair market value. Your assessed or taxable value, those terms are interchangeable depending on where you look, is the value equal to 40% of that fair market value assessed by the Fulton County Board of Assessors, and property taxes are calculated by multiplying the millage rate by that assessed value, which has been adjusted for any exemption. So at the bottom I have there, you take your assessed value minus your exemptions, multiply it times 0.00 in this current tax year, 4.731, that would be your taxes owed for the current year. Two more important definitions. We have the rollback rate. The rollback rate is the previous year's millage rate minus the millage equivalent to the total net assessed value by added reassessments. I know that's a mouthful. We have a math calculation later that shows you exactly how we calculate that. The millage equivalent is the equation where the reassessment of existing real property is divided by the current year's net digest and then multiplied by the prior year's millage rate. These are all equations to figure out what is the inflation value versus the new and existing value. Anytime the city's millage rate will exceed the computed rollback rate, we must hold 3 public hearings to allow for citizen input. Since Milton advertises at the capped millage rate to allow for maximum flexibility for council to adopt any millage rate up to that rate, we will hold 3 public hearings as follows. This evening is public hearing number 1, August 1st, 2022. The second meeting will be held after the work session on Monday, August 8th. And then the final public hearing will be held on August 15th. And followed by that third and final public hearing, we'll have the vote to adopt a millage rate for fiscal year 2023. Again, we must advertise 2 ads in the paper anytime the potential millage rate will exceed that rollback rate. I have here the example of one of the advertisements that was in the paper on July 21st and 28th. And then the second one is the 5-year history and net digest levy, and that was in the paper on the 28th as well. We'll go over the math behind all of these ads in just a moment. We must advertise this at least 1 week prior to each public hearing. And in addition, we must have an official press release and notify by publishing all this information on the city's website. And our communications director, Greg Botello, helps me ensure that we meet those requirements every year. Here we have a snipped portion of the worksheet provided by the Department of Revenue that must be used to calculate the rollback rate that we just discussed. And this shows the 2021 digest figures as well as the 2022 digest figures, and what portion of that is due to the reassessment of real property or to other changes in the digest, such as new homes, new businesses. Again, I just want to point out that Milton is required to estimate our homestead exemptions for the coming year using last year's digest values. The county does not true up that data to reflect changes that result from the final digest being issued or any appeals that are finalized throughout the year. So there's always a slight difference between the exemptions reported here on this report and those that you may see in our other reports, such as our popular annual financial report. Again, we show the math to be transparent so you can see how we get to these different values that have to be advertised. Again, that millage equivalent, we take the reassessment of real existing property and we divide that by the current year's net digest. Both of those figures came from that last snippet we just showed from the PT 32.1 worksheet from the Department of Revenue. And we multiply that times last year's millage rate. So this year's millage equivalent is 0.525 mils. That's the equivalent of that inflationary figure. Then you have your rollback rate. That's last year's millage rate minus that millage equivalent that we just calculated. So that would be 4.731, our current millage rate, minus 0.525, which is 4.206. So you will see 4.206 mils several times throughout this conversation. That is the rollback rate for this year. The percentage of tax increase that goes in that first ad that we talked about, you take your advertised millage rate, which we currently advertise again at the capped millage rate, reduce that by the rollback rate, and then divide it by the rollback rate and multiply times 100, and we have that 12.48%. You're going to hear that 12% figure again throughout this conversation. The 5-year history is a little different. It is not comparing that inflationary number, but it's looking at the overall digest growth year over year if we were to use that capped millage rate. So again, we take our current year net digest and we multiply that times the advertised millage rate, which is our capped millage rate, divided by 1,000, and that gives us our taxes levied. There you can see if we have the $3,430,201,002 total digest multiplied by that millage equivalent, we would yield at 100% collections, $16,228,281 in revenue. So again, if you compare that to the prior year's levy, you see there's a 17% growth year over year at a 4.731 millage rate this year compared to a potential 4.731 millage rate in 2022's calendar year. That is how the ads get advertised. We'll now go into talking about how we actually collect and what revenues we project to receive based on all the millage rate options we're going to talk about. You can stop here if anyone has any questions. I know that's a lot of math and information. We're good? Okay. Excellent. So here on this slide, you'll see we always show the capped millage rate, which happens to also be the current millage rate for 2022's fiscal year, which is 4.731 mils. We have the rollback rate at 4.206 mils, and then we have a midpoint millage rate, which is right between the two at 4.469. Early in the year, Mayor Jamison asked staff to consider looking at potential options of rollbacks of the millage rate and different budgetary opportunities. So the midpoint is where we're standing, but again, you have an opportunity to choose a millage rate anywhere that you'd like under or up to 4.731 mils. At the very bottom of the slide, you'll see the separately calculated green space bond millage rate. This is the variable rate used to allow for property tax collections for debt service payments on the green space bond, including principal and interest due in fiscal year 2023. This rate is in addition to the M&O rate and is not included in that cap. For reference, the bond millage rate last year was 0.487 mils, the year before 0.538, and this year we're looking at 0.452 in order to collect the revenues necessary to pay off that debt. Here you can see the net M&O digest, again, that $3 billion figure, and the taxes that will be levied under the 3 millage rate options we discussed for real property, personal property, and you can see that I'm showing you the comparison of a 100% collection rate and then what we actually historically have seen in year one. So typically we see 97% of taxes for real property collected in year one and around 65% of personal property. And those are the revenues that we would collect under each one. We have a little bit of a zoom in for you here under each millage rate. So at a 97% collection in year one for real property, a 65% collection in year one for personal property, and a 55% collection in year one for motor vehicle, under a 4.731 millage rate, you'd see a total revenue collection of $15.6 million. Under 4.469, $14.8 million. And under 4.206, $13.9 million. Again, we'll go back to those calculations we talked about earlier. The difference between the rollback rate and the capped millage rate is that 12.48% or $1.7 million. And then the difference between that capped millage rate and that midpoint rate, again, 6%, right down the middle, $865,210. For your reference to what we're currently seeing in fiscal year 2022, we have the amended budget at $13,129,743 for current year real property. And we are collections to date as of July 26th, when we first published this presentation, $13,030,473. We've included the budget summary for reference this year, and it compares the projections for FY 2023 to the amended budget for fiscal year 2022. Fiscal year 2023's property tax projections are based on that midpoint millage rate of 4.469. We will go over to the details of the revenues in just a moment. You can also see here the proposed expenditure summary by department. Staff will be going over the details of the entire budget at the work session on August 8th. We wanted to include this summary to explain that this draft budget is proposed on that 4.469 millage rate, and it would cover everything that you see here within that millage rate. Should council decide to go with an alternative millage rate option, staff would make alterations to the recommended budget as needed Traditionally, any changes would be related to the timeline of the city's pay-as-you-go capital projects, whether that be delaying or accelerating timelines based on the available funding in the PAYGO program through the approved millage rate.
Bernadette, can you say the very first thing you just said on this slide a moment ago? I think I heard you say at a particular millage rate,
Yes.
everything would be covered. Can you tell me that millage rate again, please?
So the budget before you is at the midpoint millage rate of 4.469.
Thank you.
Okay, absolutely.
That's the recommended staff budget.
So we have prepared the budget at that midpoint based on conversations we've had in the past and based on Mayor Jameson's request for us to look at some options of tiering back the millage rate. And we can alter this plan based on anything the council would like to do. Like I said, traditionally, that would be through the capital pay-as-you-go program, maybe deferring some projects for some time or accelerating them depending on that millage rate. But this is at that, just we went to the middle of rollback and capped.
I have a quick question. I know it's just peanuts, but why is it 65% collection on personal?
So we have just experienced that historically. I believe that a lot of times businesses open and close and maybe the digest don't get updated as often. We've seen at times Alpharetta's businesses on ours on Alpharetta's, and we have to go through a process to get them changed. It is the tax on the furnitures and fixtures within your business, and it just happens to be something that lags.
Interesting, because I get that bill from Fulton County also, and I send it, so I was just curious why 65%.
It's an interesting one.
Okay.
But it eventually gets to 100% or some reasonable number.
Personal property,
It
not,
just lags.
oftentimes will have more adjustments to it than our real property side. And so it's a give or take. But yes, eventually for real property for certain gets to 100%. And that's typically right after the end of year one. Personal property, somewhere near there, but not necessarily always 100% with some of the alterations that have to be done.
Bernadette, the 4.4, that midpoint does not have any impact on our future capital projects, correct?
Right. We will go over in depth detail of all the projects and any that may have been changed according to what we originally said we would do in 23 from last year's 7-year plan to this year's 7-year plan at the 8th work session.
Okay.
You have something to look forward to for a week.
That'll be quick.
So here we did a little zoom in on just the taxes category for revenue. And you can see in the first half of the page is the property taxes section. And you can see the 14.5 million, 190,000 and 22,000 figures under real property current prior, personal property current and motor vehicle tax match exactly to the 4.469, 97%, 65%, and 55% revenues we just showed on the slide previous. So the city is always looking to expand and diversify revenue opportunities as is required by, our ordinance as well as our strategic plan. And staff will be bringing forth subsequent presentations throughout 2023 related to this. And all revenue projections before you were based on the current circumstances and ordinances. So we didn't make any assumptions about potential changes to any ordinances at this time. And you can see that our greatest revenue category is, and I'll go back for a second, property taxes, with 52% of our total revenues coming from that category, and specifically 38% of our total revenues coming from real property current year taxes. Many cities have a commercial digest base closer to 40 or 50% of their digest, where Milton's remains around 13 to 15% by the design of our city. So that's just something to keep in mind. While we do understand that our primary revenue source is property taxes from homeowners, there are several ways for homeowners to recognize some tax savings and opportunities for those we have listed right here. We have our basic homestead exemption. Anyone who lives in their home can apply through the county and receive $15,000 off of the city of Milton tax bill, as well as what they receive at the county. That also qualifies them for the floating homestead exemption, which goes by the CPI. We'll talk about a little more in detail in a moment. We have our senior basic homestead exemption, and two others available to our seniors, and a full value exemption for both seniors and those with permanent disabilities. As a reminder, there will be a referendum on the ballot this November that will involve 3 questions. If approved, they will expand City of Milton's benefits for seniors through those exemptions. The first 2 questions, when approved together, will combine that 65-year age-only exemption with the 65 age and income exemption for all of those who just turned 65 to qualify for $25,000, and it'll apply to both the maintenance side and the bond side. And additionally, the income threshold for the full value exemption will be $100,000 now instead of the current $72,264. So I just wanted to point that out so everyone understands. If anyone has any questions and they are age 65 or older or have a permanent disability, please reach out to our finance department and they can get you signed up with these exemptions. We also have the more recently implemented floating CPI exemption, which applies to the primary residence and up to 5 contiguous acres of land. This exemption alone outpaces all of Milton's other exemptions, including the full value exemptions we just talked about. The floating exemption is the difference between your current assessed value and the adjusted base year value. What happens is you take that adjusted base year value and you multiply it times the CPI or 3%, whichever is lower. We believe this year it's going to be 3%. We're waiting on Fulton County to confirm that, but I think we can all probably assume that's what it's going to be. So this sample here shows you that at 3%. And you can just follow the math along and see that regardless of how your appraised value changes, if you have this exemption, your actual taxable value will not increase more than 3%. Then your other exemptions apply on top of that. So I just wanted to kind of show that a little bit, and I'm happy to go over that with anybody who has any questions about that. Another consideration is the CUVA, the Conservation Use Value Assessment. This is for properties under 2,000 acres that qualify under the state's conservation use laws and are eligible for this CUVA program to further reduce tax liability. There is a requirement to maintain the property at the standards of which the program stipulates for a period of 10 years. And if approved, the property value will be based on land use rather than market value. So this isn't an exemption, it's actually a land use reduction. So that's an important thing for many people in the city of Milton. So I'd just like to call that out as an opportunity for tax savings. We also would like to talk a little bit about the assessment notice. We know that oftentimes this causes a little concern for our residents. We just like to point out that the Fulton County does not maintain the city of Milton's by parcel exemption information, nor do they, when they send these out, have our current millage rate. We're talking about our millage rate right now. You've all received your assessment notices already. So we just like to let everyone know to please not be worried by some data being missing from these assessments. They're really just to make sure that you do agree with the fair market value that the county is assessing for your property. If you don't, by all means, you can appeal. If you agree with it, then all your exemptions that you have with the city will hold and stay true. But if you have any concerns, the department can always let you know which exemptions you have on your property. And now getting into the fun part, how to calculate your tax bill. So our average fair market value for this digest year was $625,000. We show the example with a basic $15,000 homestead exemption, not using the floating. It kind of gets a little confusing. You can get to the math the same way. Basically showing you take your assessed value times 40%, or sorry, your fair market value times 40%. That gives you your assessed or taxable value. There it is across all different millage rates. So at any millage rate, you would have the same assessed value. You take your exemptions off of that assessed value, and that becomes the rate by which you multiply the millage rate. So under 4.731, you would owe the city $1,111.79 for that year's taxes. At 4.469, $1,050.22, which is 6% less than that other rate. And at 4.206, $988.41, which is 12% less than the capped millage rate. Here you can see across all the services the city provides, the percentage by which those different taxes would be distributed. About 42% goes towards public safety, police and fire. You see about 14% going towards your governing body and administration. That's mayor and council, finance, HR, communications, all of those types of departments. And we have 18% currently going towards capital pay-as-you-go programming. This is based on the FY 2023 budget that you will see next week at the 4.469. Again, no matter which millage rate you do it, the percentage won't change, but we have that middle column is what we're going to have next week's presentation based on. Breaking it down once further, just to show you that at this millage rate, at the capped millage rate, average fair market value of $625,000 with a basic homestead exemption of $15,000 would pay $3.05 daily for all the services the city provides. At 4.469 mils, that would be $2.71, or sorry, $2.88, and at 4.206 mils, that would be $2.71. So again, the difference between those are 6% each, to show you what you'd pay daily for all the services the city provides. I'm happy to answer any questions, and again, we will go over the same presentation 2 more times for public transparency purposes.
Thank you, Bernadette. Any questions for Ms. Bernadette? Okay.
Thank Thank you.
Thank you. Real quick, any public comment?
There
Tammy?
are none, sir.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Okay, thank you. There's no zoning agenda, so we'll move on to new business.
Mayor, that new business item is consideration of a resolution adopting the 2022 City of Milton Local Road Safety Plan. It's agenda item number 22236. Public Works Director, Ms. Sarah Leaders.
All right, good evening again, Mayor and Council. We're excited tonight to bring forward the local road safety plan for adoption. And I did want to recognize the project team on this. Chief Austin is here. He's going to present with me. Rob Del Ross has been a key member since he started with the city, as well as our consulting partner, KCI, and Andrew Antweiler is here tonight as well. So our agenda for this item is to present the final plan for adoption. We'll review the vision and mission for the plan, the progress, deliverables that you've seen so far, what implementation looks like, and a quick summary. So we've shown this slide with almost every presentation, and we based the plan on the strategic plan goal to implement a transportation infrastructure that meets current needs, accounts for future growth, and allows residents to traverse Milton in a calm, safe, and efficient manner. And with that, we came up with a vision that was formed through stakeholder input. Citizens contributed to this, as well as staff, and that we're going to proactively strive through this plan to chart a strategy to make improvements to Milton's transportation network through engineering, education, and enforcement that respects Milton's rural heritage, enhances quality of life, and makes our roadways as safe as possible. So real quick to summarize what a local road safety plan is, Federal Highway Administration came up with this as a countermeasure. It's a toolkit to look at safety problems through reaching out to stakeholders, using safety data, and looking at solutions to improve safety. And most importantly, with the plan, it is a process and content that are tailored to our local issues and needs. We began this process in the fall of 2020, and the graphic on the right is our project plan for this. And there's been a lot of steps along the way, a lot of input from stakeholders, citizens, council updates, and again, our partner, KCI, that's our consultant on this, really helped us pull it all together. So this is just a summary of the meetings and the updates and all of the work that went into delivering this plan. Our task 1 and 2, that was to perform crash analysis, as well as look at roadway conditions and come up with 6 areas that we really wanted to focus the types of improvements that we're recommending to address these concerns. And this is what we, again, heard through surveys and stakeholders. And so those are vehicle speeds, distracted drivers, roadway and shoulder conditions, pedestrian, bicyclist, equestrians, intersection safety, and wildlife. Task 3 took those emphasis areas and started looking at strategies and projects that could make a difference in those areas. And it also included elements of things we could do educationally to help those areas, engineering projects we could do to address those, as well as if police enforcement could make a difference in some of those areas. Task 4 is the last thing we presented, which is the action plan. So real quickly on the engineering side of the action plan, our goal is going to be to plan, design, and construct projects using some of these safety measures. We intend to apply for a grant. There's a new grant opportunity that is actually considered an implementation grant for local road safety plans. So we're in a unique position to go after funding to support what's coming out of our plan. Utilize T-SPLOS funding. We had a bucket of funds set up in the round of T-SPLOS 2 that we can use to implement some of these strategies and projects, and then to complete these in phases. This is what came out of our highest priority engineering measures, and the gray boxes are the ones that can be done relatively quickly. So whether we look at a roadway corridor and add enhanced pavement markings, shoulders, warning signs, different things along those roadways, this could result in just a standalone project, and then it could be something more system-wide. Now I'll let Chief Austin talk about the action plan for education and enforcement.
Thank you, Sarah. Greetings, Mayor, members of council. So our education enforcement will be to perform educational campaigns with different topics each quarter of the year. We'll continue our intelligence-led traffic enforcement and education as we currently do. And then implement safety enhancements in the two focus areas, PTVs and multimodal gravel roads, which we will discuss a bit more in just a few moments. The top 5 educational campaigns from May 2022 survey and phase 1 implementation measures. The first one was rules of the road, rules for roundabouts in particular. And then the second one was rules of the road for bicycle riders. The third one, raise awareness of potential speed-related crashes and aggressive driving. And then number 4, sort of in conjunction with number 2, rules of the road for vehicles interacting with bicycles. And number 5, raise awareness of potential distracted driving related crashes. And down at the bottom there are just a few examples of what some of those educational materials might look like. So these are all measures currently taken, but the local road safety plan would work to further inform how and when to deploy resources. So this includes enforcing city and state laws identified as a strategy in vehicle speeds, distracted drivers, intersection safety, pedestrian, bicyclists, and equestrians. And of course, our police department actively focuses on traffic and safety daily through public complaints, high crash corridors, and through just general speed enforcement. Also, as part of our enforcement strategy, intelligence-led traffic enforcement and education. Dedicated officers assigned to traffic, though all of our officers are involved and responsible for traffic safety in our city. And then we would consider local ordinance additions if we found opportunities there that may help. And our next steps, of course, plan adoption, which we hope will be forthcoming. And then set a Vision Zero goal, which will be obviously a goal to have 0 crashes in our city, 0 fatalities, 0 injuries. Now, we know that's a sort of an unattainable goal, but it's kind of like crime reduction. We always shoot for 0 in our crime numbers. But setting implementation solutions with that goal in mind to keep us on the right trajectory. Seek implementation funding. Sarah talked a bit about that already. There are opportunities out there which we would explore. And then develop our implementation solutions. All right, so we already have a bit of a jump start on implementation. Projects underway or beginning that fit into the action plan. That would be vehicle speeds. So we have the speed limit evaluations, which were completed in phase 1. And distracted drivers, we have a stop and educate approach. I think we mentioned that at one of the recent council meetings. We set up some focused enforcement for just that problem within our city. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk a bit more about roadway and shoulder conditions.
I feel like that's a good category to focus our grant application for this Safe Streets for All grant. We'd look at, again, either a section of roadway where we could add a paved shoulder, a safety edge like the picture on this slide shows, just a full range of kind of those easy to implement measures to really address roadway and shoulder conditions. For pedestrians, bicyclists, and equestrians, for that emphasis area, we're starting to look at mid-block crossings. That's initially starting in some of more of our form-based code areas on Crabapple and Highway 9 area, with those projects underway in design right now. For intersection safety, that's something like what we're doing at Freemanville, Birmingham with the roundabout. We've had a history of cars running through that that four-way stop, and we've added reflective strips to the posts, but the roundabout there will be a big safety improvement. We're getting ready to put that out to bid for construction in the next month. And then along the focus areas, you'll hear the next presentation is the Crabapple area PTV or golf cart plan. So that's one way we're looking at how to make improvements for that focus area. And in a recent meeting a few months ago, we talked about the gravel roads and utilizing the newly formed Milton Trails Advisory Committee to help look at those and determine what kind of safety improvements as well as uses those will have going forward. Another key part of the plan is ongoing analysis. So as projects are implemented, we do want to keep track and monitor and evaluate the progress on our action plan. It's one of the best ways to ensure that our plan is a living document, and it should be viewed as a living document and updated to reflect our changing local needs and priorities.
Just to summarize, our goal has been, and I think we were successful, to connect with our citizens every step of the way in this plan, in the local road safety plan, so that they can be involved, engaged, and informed on what's happening within the plan. And this has been a working document with input throughout the process. We have prioritized a list of issues, risks, actions, and improvements that can be used to reduce fatalities and injuries on our local roads. And with that, we ask you to consider the resolution to adopt the local roads safety plan. And of course, we're available for any questions you may have.
Questions for Chief or Sarah? Any public comment?
There are none, Mayor.
Okay, I'll close the public comment and questions. I'll open it for motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve agenda item number 22-236, consideration of a resolution adopting the 2022 City of Milton Local Road Safety Plan.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Morgan, a second from Councilmember Verhoff to approve agenda item number 22-236. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Coming back, Sarah?
Mayor, if I could, that was a monstrous undertaking, that local road safety plan. It took a couple of years to pull that thing through, and the amount of the effort, including our partners with the consulting firm, that was significant. And now we're just beginning the fun part, and that's when you start seeing the changes. So thank you all for your efforts on that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good stuff. So we will move on to the next item. City Clerk will please sound it.
Mayor, that next item is the consideration of a resolution to adopt the 2022 Personal Transportation Vehicle PTV Plan for the Crabapple area. It's agenda item number 22237. Mr. Robert Del Ross.
Sarah's on the agenda. So I mean,
Stick with the
We're giving Sarah
plan.
a break for one item. It's been a long night. Good evening, everyone. It's a pretty momentous, long night here. We don't often present plans like this for adoption. They typically take a very long time, and it just so happens that we're discussing adopting for our second plan tonight. This is a very similar presentation that you saw from the work session a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to be talking about the personal transportation vehicle, otherwise known as PTV plan for the Crabapple area that our consultant CPL has been underway on for approximately 6 months. What I'm going to be speaking to you tonight, a little bit of background information and reviewing the local regulations that we have regarding PTV use on public streets. We're going to show you the route plan map in detail. I'm going to get into a little bit more of the weeds than we talked about at work session, and then show you some of the renderings that our consultants have provided. We'll discuss the registration process that the state law recommends, as well as discuss input that we received from the community throughout the plan, and then discuss next steps. Where are we as of right now? So in June 2020, this body incorporated elements of state law into local ordinance. And what that means, as of today, you are allowed to drive a PTV on a public street if the speed limit on that public street is 25 miles an hour and below. So if you envisioned the map of Milton and where those 25-mile-an-hour streets are, those are typically your subdivisions. Those are your public streets, neighborhood streets, residential streets. There are not a lot of connections between subdivisions right now because most of them intersect with Freemanville Road or Hopewell or Bethany, and those aren't 25 miles an hour. So that one of the reasons for the PTV plan when it started was to start to build that network specifically in the Crabapple area to allow and make connections between where the PTVs are currently allowed in order to provide them those paths to get from their origin to their destination. Their destination may be a school. Their destination may be the Crabapple commercial area. Their destination may be the convenience store or a grocery store, things like that we have in Crabapple. State law also defines what a PTV actually is. I've gotten actually a lot of questions about this. That we are not talking about farm equipment. We are not talking about four-wheeler off-road ATVs. These are golf carts, and there is a very specific state law definition of what this golf cart must contain. Those labels are on the screen.
Can you go back for just a second? Because your verbiage does not include seatbelts, but the picture does include a seatbelt.
That must have been a mistake. The graphic includes seatbelts, so yes, seatbelts are required.
Okay, thank you.
What were some of the recommendations coming out of the study? These were based on a review of the state law, comparing ourselves to some of our neighbors where PTVs are also legal, as well as just some of the recommendations from our consultant and the input that we received from the public. Recommendations to prioritize development of multi-use paths. So those would be typically either concrete or asphalt paths in the right-of-way, but not necessarily in the road, ideally 10 feet or wider. Recommendation to develop a permitting process for registration that is recommended in state law, something we're not doing today, but that after adoption, we'd be working those details with PD to bring that registration process online in the next couple months. We wanted to establish, along with that registration process, to notify the people that are registering that there are minimum insurance requirements per state law for PTVs to be used on public streets. And the way state law works there is they treat a PTV as a passenger vehicle, and they set liability minimums at that threshold. Another key recommendation and a purpose of doing this plan in the first place was to enable conversations with the state DOT, specifically related to crossings of 372. We're underway on design for a potential crossing right outside our front door on 372. We're talking to them about the other area of turning the 90-degree angle closer to the schools up going north of 372. So there are going to be options. There's a definite need for that. It's just a matter of presenting our plan to the state DOT and asking of these several options, which of these would you prefer? Crabapple, similar to number one, considering the use of multi-use and off-street paths outside the pavement. This is a question that came up in work session, and I want to make sure I was clear and explain this. Many of our neighbors, Roswell, Canton, Woodstock, Augusta, it is more common than not that when cities have been having conversations about PTVs, they have been approving them. There is one exception, and I wanted to make very sure that I explain this. Alpharetta did have a discussion about PTV use earlier, I think, than 2020 when Milton approved their ordinance. And as of today, golf carts can't be driven on public streets in Alpharetta. What that means, I'll show you a map here in the next couple of slides so you can see where the city limit is. It really doesn't affect the plan that we're adopting tonight. It does affect coordination that Sarah and I will be having with our counterparts in the Public Works Department in Alpharetta. It will not preclude us from providing accommodations on 372 outside our front door in the area that we're focusing on. But for example, there was a question at work session talking about grocery stores specifically, maybe even getting to the Kroger further down on Crabapple. You'll see on the city limit boundary, Milton doesn't stretch all the way down to Kroger. There's a section there in Alpharetta, so that would be a problem that we'd have to work through. And to be fair, just because a position is as on the screen as of today, that doesn't mean that a year, 2, 3 years from now, that may change. here's the map, and I want to go out of PowerPoint and into PDF view here so I can zoom in. There's some details in this map that you probably can't see in your packets that I just wanted to highlight. As you can see, we just talked about Kroger. The tan area is the Milton city limits. And you'll see this is the southwest corner of the city. The Kroger Plaza is
It's off the map,
off of the page.
but not further, not too far.
You can see in addition to the aqua lines, those are the multi-use pass and the off-road pass we're proposing. You see those pink crossings, one at Waterside. I'm going to go a little bit further east. You'll see a couple potential for our Crabapple Street Straight project getting from City Hall over to the commercial area on the other side of 372. We have a couple more pink lines going north on 372 to get from Kensington and some of the residential areas on the west over to the schools in the east. We've proposed some of those pink lines, anticipating that at least one of them will be approved by the state DOT to kind of show them where the need is and where the options would be. We also have, at the roundabout here, we have some crossings across just the local streets. We have another crossing here where my cursor is further south on Broadwell. We have another one at the roundabout with Heritage, Charlotte, and Mayfield. We have another crossing. This is part of the Mayfield sidewalk project. We're going to be, in addition to the sidewalk that we're constructing on the northwest side of Mayfield, we're also including a rapid rectangular flashing beacon just east of Baldwin to get residents from one side of the street and the other. So there are a lot of, in addition to the aqua lines, those multi-use paths, there are a fair amount of crossings that we also have included as recommendations on this map. Yes.
A question on the aqua lines. Are we going to allow them to drive vehicles on sidewalks? Or are we talking about enhancing what we have to make it a wider, walkable?
So the state law currently states that paths that allow PTVs should be 10 feet or greater. So no, we wouldn't recommend allowing PTVs on any 5-foot sidewalks.
This would be a future upgrade, proposed upgrade to some of these places.
That's correct.
Okay.
Going back to PowerPoint. Here are a couple of renderings. These are renderings from the plan that our consultant produced showing what some of those side path crossing along minor roadways or the mid-block crossing of a major road like 372 could look like in the future. The registration process is something that we're going to be coordinating with PTV after adoption over the next several months. This is a recommendation in the state law and is currently being used by many of our neighbors. The recommendation is a $15 fee for a 5-year registration. There is a sample registration form included in your packet. We would likely produce a decal similar to what you see on the screen in the bottom left, along with either an education or a component to make sure that the person that is registering understands what the state law is and what a PTV is. That would be a 5-year registration. Lastly, community input. So we had a survey that we released April 2022. We received 880 responses. There were 12 questions. Those answers were included in the plan in your packet, but I'm just going to go over a couple of them in the presentation. Question 2, how high of a priority should the issue of PTVs be in the city of Milton? We had approximately 56, 57% label that as a medium, high, or highest priority. Question 3, of our 880 respondents, how many currently owned a PTV? So we had 229 of the 880 that currently owns a golf cart. And of the 650 that do not own golf carts, why don't they own a golf cart? The most popular answers were the need for separated paths exclusively for PTVs, additional amenities at key destinations, for example, parking and charging. And there's a portion of our residents, 274, of those who don't plan on owning a golf cart just because that's not what they want to do. Next steps for us, again, we're recommending adoption. This would conclude our effort with the consultant. We are going to be having future conversations, Sarah and I, with the Public Works Director in Alpharetta, talking about a couple of the details regarding 372 and Crabapple Chase, along with the crossing that we had on Mayfield. And after adoption, we would be working with Ken's office on recommendations brought forth in the plan for any ordinance changes we need to work through over the next several months. That concludes presentation.
Thanks. Rick?
Rob, do you happen to have give us an idea of the size of that decal? We got one communication saying they thought it was too small, but I don't think we've given them the size.
We haven't produced them yet. I would, in my head, the decal would be similar to the horse oval that we all have very common on the back of our vehicles.
The only question I have, and I don't expect for y'all to have it tonight, but the only thing I've heard from the community is, how's the enforcement going to be done? What are the fines going to be? Are we doing warnings and all that stuff?
Mayor, if you don't mind, I'd like to defer that to Chief Austin.
Sounds good.
Typically, when we start something new, we lead with education, making sure that we have solid public education on the new requirements, what the current expectations are, and then we would move into enforcement if necessary. As far as the fines, I would imagine under our fine structure, we go into all other fines. I know, for instance, for Roswell, they charge $200 for golf cart fines that are out. But our main goal is always compliance and cooperation. And we usually get that with our citizens through education.
Roswell allows the PTVs?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Paul?
Rob, a couple more questions for you, please. Just in passing, a moment ago, you mentioned the charging stations. Whose responsibility would it be to generate charging stations throughout the community?
I am not an expert in that, but my understanding is it could go a couple of different ways. There are probably examples of governments investing and placing them on right-of-way. I would imagine there are also examples of private working directly with the utility companies to place that in their parking areas.
Or could it be a business would choose to put it in their parking area to entice people to come? I mean, if it's going to be a city involvement, I'd like to understand what our exposure could be. Look at strategic locations, how many of them, what would our cost for install be, what would a shared cost look like, and what's reasonable, other cities may be experiencing. I'd just like to explore that a whole lot
Okay,
further.
my understanding is there are partnership and opportunities like that, but that's not something that Sarah and I have spent a lot of time looking into yet.
Okay. My next question, actually maybe for Steve and Ken. So in adoption of this evening, can people begin tomorrow to begin to traverse our streets with all the authority that comes along with this, even though we don't have a permitting and enforcement, a fully connected roadway, the ability to cross 372? What are we approving?
They can already drive on all of our roads that are 25 miles an hour or under. So nothing changes there. You're just approving a plan for us to start the process to create the crossings, apply to GDOT, do all the things that we need to do to create this network of trails.
Does it make sense for us to at least explore maybe a not to exceed timeline for the permitting and the creation of the enforcement strategy?
I don't know that you need to do it in conjunction with the plan, as it's been going on for quite some time already.
Yeah.
But if that's something the council would like us to place a priority on, I certainly will.
What was the question, Paul?
Whether or not we should contemplate putting a not to exceed timeline on the registration, creating the registration process and or some of the enforcement compliance rules and regulations.
Yeah, I think that'll probably be at the next phase, right? When we're writing this code. Was that what we're talking about?
No, I think we're allowing them to use them today as a part of the test. We're basically, in my mind, affirming the test was a success, and we're going to allow people to go forward with the authority that might have expected to come from a successful outcome of the test.
Right.
But I'm just wondering if we've really got all the nitty gritty figured out, where if we do this, what are we doing? Are we open up, is it going to be great? Or are we opening up some areas that could be a Pandora's box if we don't put some of those things into place pretty quickly?
Okay.
So this is not granting anybody any authority to do anything that they don't already have the authority to do
Right.
today.
Yep.
What this approves is staff to now expend the resources to start planning out this network of trails. As far as what is loosely connected to this, and I understand that, is the registration of vehicles, what that can look like, what would it entail, and our enforcement, we could handle that parallel to this. If that's a priority for the council, we could fast track that.
Well, and I'll add something else, and not tonight, but this is why we all go through the process, because I think this is fine moving forward. But before we approve the final codes and everything, when we're discussing these trails and stuff, this is going to be the cost. And, I think council needs to understand how much we could potentially be, spending in regards to these trails and stuff. So that's, during the process.
Yeah, if we don't accomplish some of this stuff, it's trails to nowhere if we're not successful with some of the 372 crossing. Now, I sense some momentum that some of that's likely to happen, but I don't want to encourage violation if somebody from one side of 372 wants to go to the other side. We don't have some of that. I don't know if they're doing it today or not. That's where some of the enforcement part comes in that concerns me. I don't want to be a buzzkill on this, but I do want to make sure that we're being careful with process, in that we don't allow the open-ended questions to linger on for too long.
As more, I would say, speaking for myself, just with respect to the statutes, it would seem to me that the plan is what has been put in motion now. A lot of the enforcement is going to be enforcing the plan, and that's what we're going to be able to do. It seems to me like the enforcement elements might grow organically as we put together the plan, as we try to then modify behaviors and how these. I'm just simply suggesting right now, thinking about that might be step 6, and we're on step 2.
Yeah. I will use some of the words I used earlier this evening, out of an abundance of caution. I would suggest that there are some things that maybe need to be looked at to ensure that we don't have things trail on for too long.
I agree. One additional comment specifically to 372 in interaction with state DOT. One of the primary purposes this plan has even started before I walked in the door, discussions between Sarah and district staff at Georgia DOT, where we were asking them for crossings, and their answer was, show us your plan. So we're optimistic that with this plan, we'll start getting some yeses. We're not exactly sure where. We have a couple of options per the map, but we're optimistic.
Yeah, all those things that you've presented tonight makes sense. There isn't anything I take objection to with that at all. I'm just concerned that we are short on a couple of details that I think are important.
Rick?
Yeah, I think this looks good. I think it's a good start. The enforcement from a safety perspective, I guess, is where I'm looking at from a concern, because I just got a call today where someone in the Crabapple area, which we've approved these 25-mile-per-hour streets, someone was kids that were underage, and a bunch of kids were on the golf cart driving right around here on Heritage Walk and whatever. So I think the enforcement, you just have to look at, you're not going to catch everything, but if we start moving forward on this, kind of think through those from a safety standpoint.
And ideally, along with the registration process, there is a little bit of education. There's the reminder that you need a driver's license to drive one of these on a public street, period.
Yeah, that is.
I think it brings
That's not happening everywhere.
the point of having that registration as soon as possible, though.
Yeah.
Because the sooner you have that registration sticker, the sooner the police can help educate and enforce. So to me, that would be like the number one priority.
I understand that, but like we already kind of have rules in place, I guess, now. And so really, maybe Chief can speak to this, because I know I've gotten a couple phone calls a few months ago for people getting tickets from Kensington Farms. So is the police currently enforcing the Crabapple area with our current codes?
We do. We do actively enforce our golf cart ordinance. It's kind of difficult with some of those folks that are unlicensed because they're obviously underage. Can't write them a ticket, so we have to do a juvenile arrest. Well, if we do a juvenile arrest, then they have to go down to the Fulton County Court, perhaps several times. Do we really want that for a golf cart ordinance violation? And I don't think that's in line with our philosophy. So we go back to education, and then we have backtracked, has been our plan, to go back and talk to the parents and educate the parents. We've not utilized them yet, not had a need to, but we do have charging options for the parents for allowing.
That would be my recommended, if, once they don't respond to the education and the warnings.
Correct.
Maybe the parents should probably be the ones held accountable.
Right. So it'd be, more the parents than the actual juveniles out there.
That's something that during this process, y'all are going to work together and fine tune it. And okay.
So today, if you caught, excuse me, if today you had a bunch of underage drivers, what is the policy? I mean, do you stop them, of course, but do you call their parents right then? Is that
That's typically what we do. We just had a recent one, I would say within the last week, where a 13-year-old, a lot of friends, we called the parents, got the vehicle back to the residents and had a time of public education with that. No tickets. The parents were receptive of the education. A lot of people just don't know that you have to have a driver's license to drive a golf cart. And that's where I think the registration process could help, because we'll give them a booklet or a leaflet that will explain all of these things. And also, I'm sure have some insurance information. And once they see that, that might, once that insurance is paid and they have to do a payout on that, that could be very costly rates. So there are some built-in parameters there.
Yeah. And I got a call today too, and I didn't follow up with you on knowing we were going to have this tonight, and then I got the phone call, and then sure enough, I witnessed it because it went right past my house. It was underage. It was definitely not a 16-year-old driving it with 3 even younger kids on it. No seatbelts that I could see. I mean, I just caught a glimpse, but.
And certainly, we encourage our citizens or anyone to call our non-emergency line.
Yeah.
Of course, if it's that much of a danger, they're driving recklessly, 911 would be an appropriate call for that. We encourage our citizens to do that. And we'll be glad to go out and check that
Chief,
out.
if we were to impose, and I'll just offer a number, a 6-month not to exceed on your team having a chance to put together some of those parameters, and Rob, for you, that same parameter on the registration process, is that an unreasonable request at 6 months?
For our portion, the registration portion, that's.
Well, either
very
one. I
reasonable.
mean, either the
Yeah.
registration.
Police will
or-
handle both pieces of that.
Oh, they would. Okay. So is it 6 months unreasonable?
No, I wouldn't think so, not unless we run into some unforeseen obstacles.
Well, if there were, if we made that a condition of tonight's approval, we would certainly entertain a request for an extension, but it certainly would put some, not that you need fires to be lit to get things done, because you clearly have demonstrated that. But I sure would like to see a sense of urgency to get it done. That might come from a motion that would include that.
Hey, Rob, what's the timeline for this? What we're currently adopting? I know that's going to be probably a much longer
The
one.
timeline for the plan adoption, after tonight, if this is adopted, the plan effort from CPL is finished. If we go back to the map has aqua segments that are going to be future capital requests, potentially future T-SPLOS projects, potential future budget items that will just organically move forward over the next several years. Is this my gut feel, the map on the screen is probably more of a 10-year plan than a 5-year plan?
No, I was just saying to codify this in our codes and stuff.
To codify this, any regulation, any code changes, along with the effort with coordinating with PD enforcement, that is Sarah and I's top priority to bring to you over the next several months.
Okay. Thanks. Amy, any public comment?
We do, Mayor.
All right.
I'd like to invite Mr. Adam Danella to the podium, please.
Hey, how are y'all doing? I'm Adam Danella, and I live at 3119 Haybridge Lane, which is in Brayburn right here. I also have a golf cart. It's a big green 6-seater, which I'm sure most of you have seen either on Facebook or driving around. I love the plan that's in place. Most of the people that I know that have golf carts are coming down here to play cornhole, to go to dinners, things like that. Some have come from the neighborhoods up the road that they weren't necessarily supposed to be on and have gotten ticketed and don't do that anymore, but drive around their neighborhoods. In our neighborhoods here, we have 3 of them connected. And the big goal, obviously, in Crabapple is connectivity. Everybody wants trails. Everybody wants connectivity. This does that. And so I'm encouraging you to go ahead and move forward with it as quickly as possible. A question you raised. A hip restraint is simply what the chair has. That's what the law provides under state law. So you don't have to have seatbelts, but you have to have hip restraints. Most of them are being sold with seatbelts now anyway. But just to clarify that, it does not mean seatbelt. Mine doesn't have seatbelts yet. It didn't come with them from the factory. So I've got to get them and put them in. But everything else it has meets the requirements. I mean, that it has the lights, the blinkers, signals, all the stuff that's required, hip restraints without seatbelts. We use it all the time. I've seen young kids use them in our neighborhood, in the other neighborhoods. I know the police have had to address it one time. Our neighbors complained about some of these kids because they're 12, 13 years old, driving around with kids on them, It's entirely a parent thing. The parents just allow them to do it. So I don't know how you enforce that other than, going and talking to the parents, which they've done. And I know that kid walks to my house now. It's another thing I wanted to bring up that it's a safety concern. People have brought up things like that. Look at kids on bikes out here, look at kids riding up to the green, scooters, motorcycles, all the same. Those are, to me, more a safety concern than a golf cart, which has a lot more safety implemented into it. Just by virtue of it being open air doesn't change the fact that it's similar to a Jeep or something like that. But what I have noticed, a lot of people that speed in these areas, which they do, especially right here in front of this building, this little loop, just kind of on this section of it now, our neighborhood encompasses the white townhomes, the townhomes across the way, and the townhomes into our single family homes. Right here, people come down this and either turn into our neighborhood extremely quickly where we have now, speed bumps, and then come flying up to this part right here where they stop. And a lot of people cross here and do these different things. Well, I was driving my golf cart right up here and somebody was flying down this. I mean, they weren't going 25, they weren't going 35. So what I did is I just came right across the median and got right into the left turn here and just stopped right there, as if had I kept going, I would have run into them. But they clearly noticed me, clearly slowed down. So having golf carts as part of this community, people are paying attention to them, just like signs and everything else. They actually see them more so because they're in the streets, they're driving around, and it does slow people down that are driving through here at speeds that are much faster than 25. So I think that's a bonus to having them in here. And things like that. Just from the perspective of our family, we just hop in and go for a golf cart ride. I mean, if we didn't have a golf cart, we'd just be at home. But, we're like, oh, let's go golf cart, let's go drive around. And I think a lot of people would do that. A lot more people would do it from these other neighborhoods. And, every once in a while we stop for ice cream because maybe we'd have been sitting home, but now we're driving around this area on the golf cart and, say, what the hell, let's go get ice cream. But I think it's a great plan. I think it's great for the connectivity of the community. I think it brings some safety issues, with the paths and the specific things that may be of concern. And I'm all for, the registration, whatever it needs to be. But I definitely think y'all should approve it. And I think it's a nice added bonus to this community. And I think people that are moving into the community like it. In fact, the new neighbors that just moved from Chicago within the first 2 days went and bought a golf cart and now driving around in a golf cart. So I think it's a great thing to add to the city, especially the Crabapple area. So thank you.
Thank you. More public comment?
That's all, Mayor.
Okay, I'll close it. And if there's no more questions, I'll open it for a motion. Any more questions? Andrea?
I really just had more of a comment, but I think
Go
we've
for
all
it.
kind of stated it. I mean, the map that was shown is my district. I live in Crabapple. I'm one of the neighborhoods across 372 that would love access down into Crabapple using our golf cart. But the common theme that I speak about, that a lot of my neighbors and other friends that I have in Brayburn and other areas, it is the age of the driver. That is the main concern, because everybody sees the fifth graders, the sixth graders, driving golf carts around with kids in the back. I've seen them fall off golf carts in my neighborhood. It's just, that's going to be the main concern. So I guess when they're being registered, confirming that they have insurance, seeing their insurance, is that maybe something we could talk about down the road? And then I don't know if we're talking about registering what drivers will be allowed to use that golf cart when they register their golf cart as well.
My understanding is that's not something that our neighbors are currently doing. That's a detail that Sarah and I can work with Chief Austin and find that balance between obviously prioritizing safety, but still not being a large drain on staff resources every time someone comes in. We don't want that conversation to be a 4-hour process. We want to find some kind of happy medium there.
Sure. And maybe it's an application they fill out and they just list, whoever's allowed to drive the golf cart in their family that's over age or has a driver's license.
Let us take a look at some of that. I have to be careful that we're not stopping people to find out who's driving their car, their PTV.
I know what state law says on that. That was probably one question.
Just from a law enforcement perspective, you still have to have a reason to stop people. So let us dig through some of that, and we'll come back with some recommendations.
Right.
Anything else? Okay. We'll open it for a motion.
One more quick question.
All right, sure.
I need to ask it of Steve.
I'm sorry.
Steve, I'm going to try to form a motion. I just want to make sure if I do include this not to exceed for the registration and the enforcement option, that I'm not imposing an undue hardship on you or your staff.
6 months is not going to impose a hardship.
Okay.
6 weeks would have been a problem.
Yeah, no, 6 months. I think is okay. All right. Then I'm prepared to make a motion. And that is that we approve agenda item number 22-237 with the condition that those two elements, the registration and the police enforcement aspects of the plan, are prepared to be adopted within not to exceed 6 months. Second.
Okay. I have a motion from Councilmember Moore and a second from Councilmember Jacobus to approve agenda item 22-237 with Councilmember Moore's recommended changes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it. Long night for Public Works. All right. We will move on to the next agenda item. Will the city clerk please sound it?
Mayor, that item is consideration of a resolution to condemn property rights needed for Freemanville Road at Birmingham Road project. It's parcel 1, 0.07 acres of fee simple right-of-way, 0.114 acres of permanent easement, owner John P. Cole. It's agenda item number 22238. Sarah Leaders.
The intersection of Freemanville, Birmingham, we're preparing to move into bid documents on that later this month. What I wanted to show quickly is just the existing right-of-ways on both Freemanville and Birmingham, as well as the right-of-way needed for the project to build a roundabout. And early on in as we're working through the concept and getting into design, looked at utilizing as much of the city property on the southwest corner as possible. So it is the biggest impacted area that is the green space parcel there at Freemanville, Birmingham. The parcel we're talking about tonight is the northwest corner. And we have been through negotiations, and we do continue those, but this will just allow us to have the measures in place to move forward with the bid. And Ken can speak to kind of how that process has worked and that negotiations continue. But I just wanted to highlight the project and where that parcel is relative to the construction. So it's the parcel 1 is what we're talking about. Ken.
Mayor and council, yeah, there's nothing much more to say. The city of Milton is always fairly reserved in exercising its condemnation power. However, there comes a time we need to go ahead and act to timely right-of-way. Resolution includes proposed order of condemnation in your packets. Bowl is the property owner, 0.070 acres right-of-way, 4196.74 square feet of permanent easement, as well as some drainage easement. Negotiations can continue. We're always open to want to settle these at arm's length by way of negotiation, but we also need to go ahead and take action to get this in front of the court and get this right away so these public improvements.
Rick?
So we, just to be clear, because we always are very careful, we've been working with the property owner, trying to reach out, trying to get agreement, taking this so that we don't stop the process.
Any other questions? Any public comment, Tammy?
No, sir, there's none.
All right, Paul?
Just a comment. Sarah, I look forward to following up with you on the conversation that we've started, but haven't had a chance to reunite to discuss further. And that is, as we do some of these roundabout processes, the engineering, just to make sure that we don't disturb, that we investigate disturbing less land than we have on some of our already successful projects. But I just hope that we, especially in this particular case, that that property has a tree line of mature, fatiguing, aged cypress, Leland cypress, but it'd be a shame to see all those go. As an example of what I'd like to see us investigate some engineering solutions that may not require us to disturb as much land. Actually, I have one more quick question. It has to do with our roundabouts and some of our intersections. This is totally unrelated, but pardon me, I have an opportunity with you at the podium. There seems to be like an abundance of street, like oil and tar material that's appearing at the intersections. Is that a debris situation, or is that a heat and what's happening with our current paving methodology? You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yes, that is from when DOT repaved Birmingham Highway. Their turning maneuvers off of the paving side on 372 were to use Freemanville, Providence, I think even Birmingham, Hopewell.
Yeah.
Just the way those cars or the vehicles tracked around the roundabout left tacked. And it is on the 140 paving, I did notice it's part of their contract with that one to eliminate any tack on the vehicles leaving the site that may not have been in place with Birmingham. We attempted to get them to come and heat it and try to remove it, but it's just a wear from the tires of vehicles doing paving.
Yeah, yeah. It's at Birmingham Crossroads. It's at Birmingham and Freemanville. It's at the new Hopewell roundabout. It's at Providence roundabout. Just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Can we look at making sure that in our engineering that's a consideration, that we make sure that they have to pay attention to that?
Right, definitely all of our contracts that involve paving and tact, that is something we put in those, as well as working with the state on things that they let too.
Great, thank you.
Anything else for Sarah? Okay, I will open it for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we pass agenda item number 22238, consideration of a resolution to condemn the property rights needed for the Freemanville Road and Birmingham project.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Jacobus and a second from Councilmember Moore to approve agenda item 22-238. Any council discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. Okay, move on to reports. I know I don't have anything. Council have anything? Executive session? Nope. Okay, I'll move to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Morgan, a second from Councilmember Johnson to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.